I want to ask all of us to please turn our cell phones to silent. You may notice board members accessing their laptops, phones, or other devices during the meeting. They are using their devices to access board meeting materials that are in electronic format. This is an official business meeting of the Medical Board of California. As such, disruptions of the board's business will not be tolerated. We have a designated time on the agenda for public comment and ask for public comment on each agenda item. I ask that you be respectful of the need to conduct the board's business. Should anyone disrupt the meeting, I will ask that person to conduct him or herself in such a manner that permits the board to transact its business. The board welcomes public comments on any item on the agenda, and it is the board's intent to ask for public comments prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. If for some reason I forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item and you wish to speak on that item, please raise your hand or come forward and you will be recognized. I would like to request all speakers complete a presenter slip so I can call you by name at the appropriate time and that the record of this meeting can be full and complete. However, this is voluntary. Please give the speaker slips to Ms. Cruz-Jones. Ms. Cruz-Jones, can you identify yourself? I will do my best to call upon everyone who has supplied a slip for the agenda item and recognize those who wish to make a last-minute comment. This meeting will be available via teleconference. Individuals listening to the meeting will have an opportunity to provide public comment and will be assisted by a moderator who will be facilitating the teleconference process. For those members of the public participating via teleconference, please wait until the moderator has introduced you before you make your comments. To request to make a comment during the public comment period, press star 1 and you will hear a tone indicating that you are in queue for comment. If you change your mind and do not want to make a comment, press star 2. Assistance is available throughout the teleconferencing meeting. To request a specialist, press star 0. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes per agenda item. However, that time frame may be subject to change depending upon the number of speakers on a topic. During agenda item 2, public comments on items not on the agenda, the board has limited the total public comment period for individuals on the teleconference to 20 minutes. In addition, the total public comment for individuals here at the meeting will also be 20 minutes. Therefore, after 20 minutes, no further comments will be accepted during the public comment on any other agenda item. 10 minutes will be allowed for the total comment period for individuals on the teleconference line and 10 minutes for those in the audience. After 10 minutes, no further comments will be accepted. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes per agenda item. Business Services Office staff will be assisting me with receiving the public comments via teleconference during this meeting. I want to remind all speakers to please stay on topic and keep your comments again to 3 minutes or less. Today's meeting will be run according to the Open Meeting Act as required by law, and we plan to end around 5:30.
I would like to introduce Patrick Lay from the Department of Consumer Affairs here with us today.
Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to say how much we've missed our friend, Barbara Yurlowski. Okay, I said that a little wrong. Yurlowski.
Barbara.
Barbara would laugh that I said her last name wrong right now. Barbara passed away on December 26th from a battle with West Nile virus. Barbara was appointed to the board on September 24, 2003, and served until February 29, 2016, almost 13 years. She served on almost every committee on the board and served as board president for 3 years. She spent her life helping others and serving her community. Everything she did was with someone else in mind. She made everyone feel important. She led this board and the committee she chaired by always having consumer protection at the heart of all she did. She will be deeply missed, And if you want to make a donation in honor of Barbara, they should be made to Sabian Community Clinic, and you can talk to Ms. Kirschmeyer or Dr. Lewis for information on donating. I would like to take a moment of silence in Barbara's memory and honor at this moment. I would like to call the meeting to order and ask that Ms. Cruz-Jones please call the roll.
Dr. Bolat,
Here.
Ms. Friedman,
Here.
Dr. Gonadev,
Here.
Dr. Hawkins,
Here.
Dr. Kraus,
Present.
Ms. Lawson, Ms. Lubiano, Dr. Lewis,
Present.
Ms. Sutton-Wills,
Here.
Mr. Warmoth,
Here.
Ms. Wright,
Here.
Dr. Yip,
Here.
Ms. Pines.
Here. We have a quorum. I would like to remind the members again that we will be taking a roll call vote on all action items. Moving to agenda item 2, public comment on items not on the agenda. Okay, I have some slips here. Philip Coffin.
Hello. My name is Philip Coffin. I'm a board-certified and practicing internist, infectious disease, and addiction medicine specialist, as well as the director of substance use research at the San Francisco Department of Public Health, where I conduct research into the opioid crisis. I also sit on a drug safety committee for the FDA, the board of the CDC Injury Center, and I was part of the committee that developed the CDC opioid prescribing guidelines. I also train providers throughout California in how to train other providers on opioid stewardship in order to improve opioid prescribing throughout the state in collaboration with the California Department of Public Health. In those trainings and following up with our trainers around the state, I've heard multiple reports of providers who have outright stopped prescribing opioids due to fears about the board's death certificate project. Sometimes the fears are about escalating medical legal concerns in general, and sometimes they're explicitly related to the board's project because a colleague got a letter, etc. I've also heard about families traumatized by calls from the board, and very importantly, I've heard about several providers and clinic systems that have aborted plans to start providing buprenorphine for opioid use disorder treatment because they felt it was too high risk in light of the board's actions. Patients with opioid use disorder are at elevated risk for overdose, of course, and providers and administrators do not want to take on the added risk of board investigations in order to care for a population that's already perceived as challenging and extremely stigmatized. Providers have very little guidance for managing opioid-experienced patients. The CDC guidelines are intended for opioid-naive patients. I know, I was part of their development. The proper management of these patients is complex, but it clearly needs to be patient-centered. In a CDC-funded study involving patient interviews and independent reviews of medical charts and prescribing of opioids, we found that patients who were discontinued from opioids were 2.5 times more likely to use street opioids than patients who were maintained on their opioids. This is even more concerning as fentanyl increases throughout California. In San Francisco, up to half of the heroin on our street is now fentanyl. Patient-centered management sometimes means continuing to prescribe opioids, and sometimes it means providing a very slow and cautious taper that could take years if you're going to manage people correctly and should not be rushed by fears about one's license. Sometimes it means starting opioid use disorder treatment, usually buprenorphine, which is also effective for pain. Both of these important approaches and the opioid stewardship program supported by the California Department of Public Health are in conflict with the death certificate project. To have prescribers stop prescribing out of fear for their license, and worse yet, to have them not be willing to treat the opioid use disorders, which we as a medical community created based in part on the board's requirements to take CME advocating opioid prescribing that was often industry funded, is dangerous to patients and frankly violates the ethical principles of medicine. I strongly urge the board to discontinue the project, which is unintentionally harming patients.
Thank you. Before we invite speakers to come forward, additional ones, I want to ask individuals making comments not to discuss pending complaints or pending licensing applications or pending disciplinary actions that may come before the board for a decision. Such discussions are considered ex parte communications as they could provide information to members that is outside the record and in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act. Therefore, such discussions should create a conflict and lead to board decision being challenged in Superior Court. The board can receive comments regarding the board's processes in general, but it cannot receive specific comments on case circumstances where the decision is still pending. Board staff is available to speak with you about any pending matter. In addition, the board would like the public to address the board as a whole and not to individual members. Please be aware that public comment during this agenda item should provide information to the board members and is not a discussion between the board members and the public. The only action board members can take is to listen to comments and decide whether they want a future agenda item on this topic. No other action can be taken on the item at this meeting. Though this may seem at times like the board members are not being responsive, following these guidelines is critical to ensure the rules of the Open Meeting Act are followed to avoid compromising the speaker's goals or the board's mission. So, the next person is David Kahn.
Hello, my name is Dr. David Kahn, and I'm the president of the California Society of Addiction Medicine. CSAM, for short, is the largest state chapter of ASAM, the American Society of Addiction Medicine. CSAM represents over 600 physicians and healthcare provider members. We are among the first responders to the opioid epidemic we now face, and I'm here today to speak on behalf of our members and our patients. CSAM is observing that the actions now being taken to implement the death certificate project are causing adverse outcomes in the patients we currently treat. As a result, we strongly recommend that the medical board and the public for which it represents halt the current investigative process until it aligns its policies directly with the CDC guidelines, opposing involuntary opioid tapers and addressing the adverse impact this project is having on patient care. Here's the basis for this recommendation. CSAM conducted a survey of its membership and found the following. Our members reported witnessing forced opioid tapers or forcing opioid tapers themselves as a result of actions targeting doctors as the quote-unquote problem. Our members reported seeing more and more patients moving to dangerous drugs like heroin and fentanyl as a result of forced opioid tapers. More than 50% of our members reported an increase in illicit opioid use as a result of opioid tapers, and 75% rated specialty pain care in their area as worsening in access and in quality. We're less than 3 years into our current knowledge of opioid prescribing with the 2016 CDC guidelines, yet physicians are being judged on the knowledge that was known as long as 8 years prior. We're seeing more and more patients every day summarily abandoned in the name of quote-unquote safety. What is safe about leaving a doctor's care and turning to the streets for heroin and fentanyl? I've personally given talks about opioid safety to many physician groups at the state and local level. I have clearly heard the message that physicians fear the medical board action if they continue to prescribe opioids, even if done appropriately. Primary care doctors are declaring that they no longer prescribe opioids and their patients are being abandoned. Therefore, CSAM urges the medical board to suspend all investigations until the exact impact of the CDC guidelines is known and necessary amendments to the project can be made. We believe that amendments to the medical board's death certificate project will result in better care and outcomes for the people we care about most, our patients. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Feel free to contact me with any questions, or you can email the California Society of Addiction Medicine at csam@csam-asam.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Edward Matchinger.
Hello, my name is Edward Machtinger. I'm a professor of medicine at UCSF, and I direct our women's HIV program. I'm here today to urge the board to immediately pause the death certificate project because its impacts are unintentionally harming the very patients it was designed to protect. So here's the problem. The Death Certificate Project is creating panic among frontline clinicians who treat patients with complex health and social conditions. Providers are scared that one of their patients will overdose for reasons totally out of their control and that they will be humiliated or worse by this board if they had prescribed opiate pain medicines for them. This fear is justified because there is a lack of detailed guidance from this board or others about how to ensure a provider is in full compliance when treating patients like mine who have been on stable opiate pain medications for chronic pain for many years. What guidance exists suggests that clinicians should approach each of these complex patients deliberately, carefully evaluate them for opiate use disorder and other substance use disorders, use multimodal approaches to pain management, and weigh the risks and benefits of ongoing opiate use carefully and in collaboration with each patient. The panic among providers created by the project makes this deliberate approach nearly impossible. Instead, out of fear to protect themselves, many clinicians are coercively initiating opiate tapers or coercively changing their medications to buprenorphine without first engaging in deliberate and collaborative efforts with individual patients. Many providers are now simply refusing to accept any new patient who is on chronic opiates for their chronic pain. I see the results of this in my clinic every week. Patients are increasingly presenting for care in acute withdrawal after having had their opiates rapidly tapered or stopped, or when they are unable to find a provider to accept them as a patient. Many of these patients have relapsed on heroin or have started to buy pain medications on the street to avoid withdrawal symptoms or to treat their pain, which is obviously really dangerous. So I also think it's really important that each of you know that the patients that I see being adversely affected by the Death Certificate Project are predominantly African American, Latino, or from other minority groups. This racial disparity isn't surprising. It's well documented that providers of medical care in general have implicit bias that leads to broad assumptions that an African American or Latino individual is more likely to be abusing drugs independent of any other objective factor. It shouldn't surprise us that anything that increases fear and panic among providers will increase the impact of this bias and lead to even worse outcomes for California's minority populations. This project, left unchanged, has the very real potential to add to the structural violence experienced by California's minority populations. So in conclusion, I'm here because I, like all of you, care deeply about the health and well-being of California's most vulnerable patients. For their health and well-being, I strongly urge the board to immediately pause the Death Certificate Project and retailor it and improve it with new information that has emerged about its strengths and deficiencies. Thank you all so much for your consideration and for your service on this board.
Thank you. Eric Andrist.
First, I fully support the Death Certificate Project. I just hope you're administering it properly and that something doesn't backfire in the long run, because we'll be watching that too. To the two new board members, welcome. I'm Eric Andrus from the Patient Safety League. The other board members know my story, but quickly, my mom and disabled sister died from medical errors. I filed a medical board complaint against the doctor whose actions led to my sister's death, and this board refused to act on the complaint and closed it twice, allowing the doctor to continue practicing with no accountability, even though I settled a lawsuit with him and the hospital. And here's an update. The Board of Registered Nursing just recently put the two nurses in my sister's case on probation, but this board refused to even investigate the doctor that actually killed my sister. How ludicrous is that? I hope the new members will take your jobs on this board more seriously than some of the other board members, especially the public members who rarely speak up, who seem to succumb to peer pressure from the doctor members and spend most of the meetings sitting on their hands and saying and doing very little. I was sad to see Judge Feinstein leave the board after speaking up about problems she's experienced with this board. She mysteriously and very unceremoniously disappeared, and her resignation letter talks about how she, quote, can no longer continue to fulfill the important duties of a board member in a manner that meets the standards I set for myself, unquote. Clearly, her standards were higher than this board's, and we appreciate her attempt to try and expose the wrongdoings here and look forward to possibly participating with us in the future. I hope the 2 new board members will be even braver and step up when they see something is clearly wrong and not be bullied by the doctor members on this board or any of the staff. Your duty is to protect the consumers of this state from bad doctors, not protect this board from accountability. I try to keep all of you informed of our medical board investigations by email, so if you aren't receiving my emails and want to, make sure I have a working email address for you. One of Ms. Larson's emails bounced back to me recently, so I assume that means she doesn't want to hear any of the information we are finding. But I think all of you have a responsibility as a board members to take an active interest in what consumers and advocates want to tell you, even if you don't respond. Although I don't really get this not responding thing because it's just rude and unprofessional. Even if it's just to say thank you for the information, I'll take a look at it. I don't see how you can do your jobs properly if you aren't staying on top of every aspect of what's going on with this board. We have some interesting and enlightening presentations again for you this time. We have another one of our board's victims, Mario Guzman and Ludmila Parada, who just testified at the enforcement meeting. They'll be back again to tell their story if you missed it. We also welcome our friends from the press who are here and help to document some of the unfortunate happenings with this board. Thanks.
Thank you. Hannah Ree.
Yes, hello again, members of the Medical Board of California. So to maybe repeat a little, my name is Hannah Ree, Dr. Ree. I'm a member of the CMA, Los Angeles County Medical Association, and recently elected delegate by my colleagues at the CMA's Ethnic Medical Organization section to represent them at the House of Delegates in 2019. So I am also a previous defendant of a failed ISO attempt filed by your board despite no mental illness, but in fact was acting as a normal person within my race and religious beliefs. So Dr. Bolat may not recall this, but in my line of work doing Medicare in-home health assessments, I actually had seen several of your wonderful patients who speak very highly of you and your work. One that stands out is a Hispanic woman with rheumatoid arthritis, and was just very grateful for all that you continue to do and have done. So again, as I stated previously, those of us doing outpatient, non-hospital affiliated physician caring for Medicare patients are caught between a rock and a hard place. With your medical experts, you need to update them, number one, on MIPS, and that there, physicians such as myself are trying to not get penalized by Medicare because of their new standards. And then number two, your medical experts, God bless many of them, don't even seem to know the difference between cellular and Wi-Fi. And so, granted, they are experts in their field on paper, but utilizing medical records and criticizing an automated medical record system is not standard and current for medical experts of the medical board. And so in addition to that, in my line of work, as I stated previously, I do house call medicine, and I sit across the kitchen table or sit in the living rooms of African-American patients in Crenshaw, in Oakland, in San Diego. Patients always discuss feeling like their non-diversified doctor's office staff don't seem to care much about them. I'd feel better if they hired more black folks in that clinic. Black Patients Matter requests the opportunity to provide presentation on the ongoing racial disparity and how the board can help in closing the gap. As a participant in the California Black Health Network and follower of Pastor Shields at Progressive, I can say with certainty we have a significant increase reaching epidemic proportions in autoimmune diseases such as sarcoidosis, lupus, glaucoma, blindness amongst California Black patients. We call on the board to stop contracting with medical experts with no training in racial nor religious diversity as evidence on their resumes, as well as diversifying the DCA's Office of Investigations so as to close the morbidity and mortality gaps amongst Black patients. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments on the phone?
Any comments on the phone?
Yes, we have a comment from Susan Lauren with Lipo Coalition. Your line is open.
Hi. Nothing can be more important to a state than its public health. That was said by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The statutorily required mission of the Medical Board of California is to prioritize public health safety above any other value or goal. But your board enables bad procedures and dangerous doctors to flourish. You protect offenders. You re-victimize victims. You prohibit the police or DA from investigating medical crimes because medical malpractice is in your jurisdiction and you're failing. Citizens are killed and suffering because of your failures, and I am one of them. Your board showed depraved indifference. Sorry, I'm in pain, physical pain. Just give me a minute. Your board showed depraved indifference by normalizing the surgical assault that was done to me. Now, I had Kimberly send an email to you all that showed a video that showed, in pictures that showed that my body was made mincemeat of. This is not normal. It wasn't asked for. It wasn't needed. I was fit and healthy, a hiker, runner, did yoga, and this shameless surgeon has hurt other women before and after me. No one in their right mind would go to him if they knew the atrocities he committed. But you don't give the public warning or stop him from destroying more lives. If someone commits a crime on the street, bystanders will call police, but medical harm is covered up by your board, and it is unacceptable. When I reported the medical assault to your board, a biased staff member said she had liposuction and was happy with it. However, there's no relation to her short-term satisfaction and the contraindicated assault done to me when I went for a medically indicated breast reduction. Criminal cover defines my case. Also, adipose removal is scientifically proven to cause health and contour problems long-term, and it does. The offending surgeon operated on over 60% of my healthy body when a conservative, substantially different procedure was planned. There are doctors who examined my body and paperwork in depth. They wrote and testified, saying this is medical battery. They wrote to you. No investigator ever caught them. I presented a lot of evidence, but your investigation was a total sham. An investigator interviewed me alone. I asked him for a witness, but was denied. This denial of surgical attack is gaslighting. If you don't know, gaslighting is a form of manipulation and torture using denial, minimization, misdirection, contraindication, and lying. Now, Christina Dell told me to contact the police and DA, but why would she say this? Law enforcement has told me for 7 years they would love to investigate, but they can't. Their hands are tied. I recently spoke to Kimberly Kirchmeier about the ADA disability discrimination your board showed me by denying my request for a phone line for the meeting that was supposed to be a few weeks ago. On that call, Kimberly said it was my opinion that the surgeon caused me severe bodily harm. Now, every one of you should have seen the video of my body by now. And if you believe that, if you say that, you are gaslighting and slandering me and letting a very dangerous...
Conclude.
Calling facts opinions is a legal ploy to protect doctors, and it's gaslighting. Am I cut off now? Am I cut off?
Caller, your time has expired. Please conclude.
Okay, thank you. What the surgeon did doesn't match the paperwork. It was void of rational or skilled behavior, and I call for an audit on the expert reviewers.
Our next comment comes from Kanwar Gill with no affiliation.
Hello, my name is Kanwar Gill, and I'm calling from Fresno, California, and I just want to add on a few things the other speakers have said on that project. I believe the death project is misguided, timed very improperly, and certainly has not looked at the full spectrum of the problem. It is my understanding that the board was aware and was part of the task group of which Department of Public Health was one member since 2014, and board did not act from 2014 up until January of 2017. When you guys invited Karen Smith from Department of Public Health, the director, to give you a talk, and at the time it was understood that you guys are working together as part of a work group to find and review the cases, which you should have known since 2013 after a failed legislation requiring you to get the data from CDPH. But regardless, there's a statutory time limit of 7 years. Board officials were fully aware of it, and now the death project. And one starts to wonder why a death project now. It is clearly related to the outcome of the 2016 November elections and the states which actually swung in favor of Trump. The death rates in some of those counties were 20 per 100,000, and those states clearly voted. And I had sent an email to Ms. Delp and Ms. Lally showing the data, how 36 counties where such a change occurred because of an opiate crisis, how those were Republican. I guess the worry now is not to deal with the opiate crisis, the worry nationwide is that the entire U.S. doesn't turn red and lose the 2020 elections to Republicans. I think that's where the whole effort is coming from. And finally, I would want to clearly trace the origins of the opiate crisis. You know, if you look at the FDA approvals for some of these drugs, they came in mid-90s in Bill Clinton administration. If you look at how the changes were made to CME programs of the board, requiring 12 hours of pain education for physicians, and how the push was made in 2006 towards it, and allowing physicians to prescribe more and more pain medicine and disciplining them who were under-treating pain, led to the rise of death. And the death rise started somewhere in mid-2007, 2008, and kept rising. And one starts to wonder why some people were sitting with their eyes closed for 12 to 14 years. And now the problem is not a black problem or a Hispanic problem. It's a white, middle-class, non-Hispanic in California and elsewhere, which are dying at twice or three times the rate of any other racial or ethnic group. So let's admit it, it's a white problem, it's a non-Hispanic problem. Those are the people dying, and we need to somehow address it rapidly without throwing in some other biases. But we need to first take care of the people who are now not getting their prescriptions because the physicians have been scared. And
Sir, your time is concluded. Please conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other callers?
No further public comments.
Okay, thank you. Moving to agenda item 3, approval of the meeting minutes from the October 18th, 19th quarterly meeting. Okay. Are there any comments from the public in the audience on the meetings? Any comments on the phone?
Are there any comments on the phone?
No comments on the phone.
Okay. Ms. Cruz-Jones, please perform the roll call.
Dr. Bolat?
Yes.
Dr. Gonadev? Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus?
Aye.
Ms. Lubiano?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Sutton-Wills?
Yes.
Mr. Warmoth?
Aye.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Dr. Yip?
Aye.
Ms. Friedman?
Abstain.
Ms. Pines?
Yes. Now we'll approve the minutes for the December 18th interim board meeting. Are there any additions, corrections from members? Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Are there any public comments from the audience? Any comments from those on the phone?
Are there any comments on the phone?
No public comments on the phone.
Okay. Ms. Cruz-Jones, please perform the roll call.
Dr. Bolat?
Yes.
Ms. Friedman? Dr. Gonadev? Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus?
Not present at that meeting and so abstain.
Ms. Lubiano?
Abstain as well.
Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Sutton-Wills?
Yes.
Mr. Warmoth?
Aye.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Dr. Yip?
Aye.
Ms. Pines?
Aye. I'm now moving to agenda item 4, President's Report. But before I give the President's Report, we have 2 new members with us today, and I would like to begin my report by introducing each of them and swearing them in as members of the Medical Board. Ms. Susan Friedman and Ms. Lori Lubiano were appointed on December 13th, 2018 by former Governor Jerry Brown. Ms. Friedman is an Emmy Award-winning network news producer for NBC News from 1982 to 2008 and from 1968 to 1977. She is a reporter and producer for PBS from 1977 to 1982. Ms. Freeman is a founding member of the Alliance for Children's Rights Board of Directors, Vice Chair and Commissioner on the Los Angeles County Mental Health Commission, and a board member of Facing History. Ms. Lubiano has been Intellectual Property and Product Counsel at the Climate Corporation since 2017. She served as a member of the Daly City Planning Commission from 2010 to 2015. Ms. Lubiano is president of the Filipino Bar Association of Northern California, a founding member of the National Filipino American Lawyers Association, and a member of the Mission Hiring Hall Board of Directors, the Asian American Bar Association of the Greater Bay Area, and the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. I don't think she sleeps. I would like to swear you both in today. Ms. Freeman, can you join me in the front here? Come forward. I'm going to hold my hand up. Ms. Freeman, can you please come forward and raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, Susan Freeman, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, and against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear truth, faith, and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely and without mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter. Thank you. Welcome to the board.
Thank you.
Ms. Lubiano, can you come forward? Oh, okay, so you can hear me now. Hi. Ms. Lubiano, can you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, Lori Lubiano,
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California
the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear truth, faith, and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am to enter.
discharge the duties from which I'm about to enter.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
So welcome to Ms. Freeman and Ms. Lubiano. We are excited to have you both on the board. While we welcome these two members, we also will be saying goodbye to Dr. Levine. As you know, Dr. Levine's term was up June 1st of 2019, but due to other obligations, she was unable to attend this meeting and have chosen to leave the board effective December 31st of 2018. However, we plan to recognize Dr. Levine at a meeting here in the Bay Area in August, which she will be attending. Now for the President's report. Dr. Lewis and I have had calls with executive staff to discuss the meeting agenda and other board projects. Additionally, in November, the board published its annual report for 2017-2018. I would like to thank the staff for their hard work in putting this report together and a job well done. In December, the board released its third podcast, which details the postgraduate training licensure that is now effective. I will recommend listening to this and to understand the modifications to licensure. Lastly, in January, I was on a call with DCA to discuss the budget. I also attended the board's all-staff meeting where I discussed with staff the importance of the board's mission and thanked them for their hard work through the year. In addition, I presented our first President's Award to board staff. Mr. Eichelkraut and Mr. Islami won the award for their innovative achievements in developing the iOS application. I am proud to say that our License Alert mobile app application now has over 9,000 downloads, and I encourage every board member and staff here to get at least 10 people to download the app by the next board meeting. That same day, I was requested to meet with the California Medical Association Executive Committee to discuss my goals and plans as president of the board. Ms. Kirchmeier and I attended the meeting and also discussed the death certificate project, the changes in licensing requirements, and information being disseminated by the board regarding legislative changes to prescription pads due to AB 1753. I would also like to draw the members' attention to BRD 4B, which is the updated committee roster. We have added new members to some committees and reorganized committees based upon the motion at the last meeting. I am very excited about the changes and think that they will strengthen our panel committees and task force. If any member has an interest in other committees or would like to change their committee assignment, please feel free to contact me or Ms. Kirchmeier. Are there any questions or comments from the members on the President's report? Are there any public comments from those in the audience? Eric.
You mentioned how many people have downloaded the app, but we all download apps and never use them. How many people are actually using the app, and are you getting bad feedback and good feedback from it? Because I'm seeing some people having problems with it online.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments in the audience? Any comments on the phone?
I have no comments on the phone.
Okay, great. Moving to agenda item 5, board member communications and interested parties. Do any board members have anything to report? Okay. Yep, Deb.
Just want to let you know that I got a lot of calls on the two things which one of them we heard and one we'll be hearing from Jennifer, that is the prescription issue. Without any kind of a leeway time where the new prescriptions are started January without a lot of people knowing other than 3 days before. And the second one is on the death certificate project, and I did talk to Kim, so I informed her what's going on. Thank you.
Okay. I have a speaker slip here. Connor Finney.
Hello, my name is Connor Finney again. I'm with Consumer Watchdog. I just want to laud the board for taking this really proactive step to improve communication with California's patients and patient advocates this year. By opening up this line of communication with the public, the board has opened up a unique opportunity to give a voice to patients as well as communicate the processes and unique challenges of the enforcement process with the public. I urge the board to not only continue to hold and conduct these interested party meetings regularly, I urge the board to listen to patients and patient advocates who speak for many who cannot speak for themselves, and take their recommendations seriously. I also urge the board to stay the course with the death certificate project, as it is an important tool to protect California's patients. The victims of overprescription never complain about being overprescribed, and by holding negligent doctors accountable, you are doing a lot to protect California's patient population. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments from the audience? Mr. Andrews?
I noticed Ms. Wright was out for when you asked if there was any interested party meetings. Did she have any that she needed to talk about?
Do you?
Are you asking? Are you asking?
Okay, because I noticed at the last meeting in San Diego for over 30 minutes, Ms. Wright left the meeting and interrupted our press interview that we set up with our guest speaker, Charles Johnson, and then commandeered his attention for a long period of time when he was there for our purposes. Did you forget to divulge that, Ms. Wright, or did you just not want to bring it up? Makes one wonder how often there are other communications that aren't divulged. Thankfully, Charles Johnson didn't buy what she was selling. Speaking of which, I filed a complaint against Ms. Wright, and I'd like it on the record that no one from the medical board replied to that complaint. So I guess you're going to ignore the matter and not have the professionalism to pretend to care about such a violation. So I'd like to make a public request in front of the board that my complaint be taken seriously. I'll follow up at the next meeting to see what you've accomplished, and I will bring this up at every meeting until it's addressed. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any additional comments on item number 5 in the audience? Are there any comments on the phone?
We have no public comments on the phone.
The next agenda item is the Executive Management Report. Ms. Kirschmeyer?
Good afternoon, members. I apologize. This is a little bit longer of a report than I normally give, but there's a lot of detail that I want to pass on to you. So again, please find in the executive management reports under agenda item 6, there are a few items I would like to bring to your attention. Later today, we will be hearing from Budget Officer at the Department of Consumer Affairs on our budget, but I did want the members to know, as stated in the report, that the board has one budget change proposal that was released in the governor's budget on January 10th, and 3 proposals that will impact the board that aren't specifically the board proposals. The board proposal that is our own is to increase the hourly rate of the medical experts, as was requested by the board, and also listed in our strategic plan. We're excited about that, finally. I think we've wanted this for a while. The others that impact the board are increase in funding for medical consultant hours at the Health Quality Investigation Unit at the Department of Consumer Affairs, and this is to assist with those board investigations, and so they need more hours, and so there's a proposal for that. One is to decrease the Attorney General line item due to the elimination of the vertical enforcement process. And then the last one is to increase staffing at the Department of Consumer Affairs to assist in the regulation review, the fiscal operations and business services, and personnel. On page BRD 6A5, you can see the impact of these proposals to the board's budget. As stated at the last meeting, the board is going to be looking in the future for a fee increase. If it's the current spending remains as is, we're going to have to be looking at that probably in the next fiscal year. Due to the way the process has to go, because it does have to go as a legislative proposal, we will be looking to do a fee audit of the board's spending, and we have to do that prior to taking that bill forward to get a fee increase. And Mr. Schick is going to be talking about that in a moment. But we will have to do that soon, because if you look at the fund condition, it does show in the future that we will be without our fund. DCA will be providing more information on that. And then I also want to give an update on some projects that the board has been working on diligently over the last quarter. The first is the change to the postgraduate training requirements that will become effective January 1st, 2020. Board staff has worked to update applications and policies to be ready for the change at the end of the year. Staff have been doing presentations upon request statewide to assist in the transition. Board staff have also developed documents that are posted online as well. And if any of you have questions from colleagues, please refer them to our website. In addition, the board will be providing webinars every month from February to July to provide program directors and staff information on the new requirements and to allow for an opportunity to answer questions. 2 webinars will be held each month. The board also developed FAQs that are very helpful for individuals, and those are also will be released on the website. The other project the board is working on, which is also in your board packet, is the Licensed Physician and Dentists Mexico Pilot Program. This program was created to allow up to 30 licensed physicians specializing in family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, and obstetrics and gynecology from Mexico to practice in California for a period not to exceed 3 years if certain requirements are met. These individuals are only authorized to work in specific clinics within California. The board has received funding from philanthropic entities to begin this program, and we're working on applications and procedures for that program. The board should be ready to receive applications by the end of April, actually, of this year. Finally, I would like to give an update on the project that has now been identified as the Death Certificate Project. I believe it is important to understand how this project began. At the end of 2012, there was a series of articles in the Los Angeles Times regarding the opioid epidemic and the inappropriate prescribing by physicians. As a result of these articles, this became a major issue at the board's Sunset Review hearing in 2013, including numerous patients who came to the hearing talking about their experience or the death of a loved one. The legislature wanted the board to do more and also wanted the board to be more proactive instead of reactive on this issue. Then Senator Lieu and then later Senator Price, who were both chairs of the Senate Business and Professions Committee, introduced Senate Bill 62, which would have required coroners to report deaths when the cause of death is a result of prescription drug use. That report would have contained identifying information that would have been provided to the board. However, that law was actually vetoed and because of unfunded state mandate. It is important to note that coroners are already required to report, but they only have to report based upon a finding by a pathologist indicating that a death may be the result of physician's gross negligence or incompetence. And so that's kind of the problem. We get a low number because it has to go through that process. After the veto of this bill, staff spoke with Senate Business and Professions Committee about the bill and a possible solution. After these discussions, board staff thought it may be able to find another path to the information, so we contacted the Department of Public Health, who collects all death certificate information. After almost 2 years and several meetings, the board signed an interagency agreement with the California Department of Public Health to obtain information on deaths related to opioid prescription drugs in 2012 and 2013. And it's important that the reason we asked for those years is because at the time when we were going through this, those were the 2 recent years that the board was looking at. This data set used codes that CDPH used to identify underlying cause of death and contributing causes of death in order to identify opioid pharmaceutical-related deaths. So in August of 2015, the board received the information for both of these years. Once that data file was received, the board used the CARES database to determine who was prescribing to individuals and also looked at the prescribing practices of the attending physician or the physician who certified the death. Once CARES information was obtained, the reports were sent to licensed physician experts who reviewed the data to determine if it appeared there may be inappropriate prescribing. It's very important to understand that this information was reviewed by experts who are licensed physicians who looked for that prescribing pattern. These physician experts were looking for several things, including but not limited to high-dose opioids with morphine equivalencies greater than 90, opioids in combination with sedating drugs like benzodiazepine, soma, sleeping pills, or other unsafe combinations of medications. The frequency of prescriptions, the physician's specialty in relation to the prescribing, and any other red flags that identify this physician may be inappropriately prescribing. Once this was done, the board opened cases on all physicians that the physician experts believed could potentially be inappropriately prescribing. At this point, the case followed the board's normal enforcement process. Letters were mailed to physicians asking for medical records on the patients. Once the medical records were received, it was reviewed by another expert using the board's prescribing guidelines and the standards of care that were in place in 2012 and 2013 to determine if there was a departure from the standard of care. If there was a departure, the case was then sent to investigation. Some cases were straight to investigation because there was already a case being worked in the field on the physician based upon another source. We're nearing the end of this project and the first phase of this project, in that almost all of the cases we have been through the investigation process, almost. I would like to share some statistics regarding this project so you can see its importance. As you remember, the board looked at 2,692 individual deaths. Of those, 2,256 had a CARES report that needed to be reviewed by the medical expert. After review, the board identified 522 patients that needed initiated to investigate for inappropriate prescribing. 72 of those patients actually, though, had prescribers that were not allopathic physicians, and we sent those to the appropriate licensing board. Based upon those patients, 519 cases were opened. However, 8 of those were opened in error because we identified a different physician, so that equates to 511 that were our starting point. 89 of those cases actually are still pending at the investigation stage or pending review, foreclosure, or transmittal to the Attorney General's office. 248 of those cases were closed due to either no violation or insufficient evidence, meaning one simple departure was found, and it requires repeated negligent acts in order to file an accusation. Several of those closed cases were actually closed, though, because we had no records for the care and treatment and we could not proceed. 50 of the cases were closed past the statute of limitations, and 14 were closed because the physician was deceased or the license was canceled. 3 cases we've issued a citation and fine on, and 13 have been referred to the AG's office for an accusation or referred for DAs for criminal actions that are still pending there. 50 accusations have been filed, and 5 have had disciplinary action taken against them. In addition, 43 of them were actually closed because either the physician already had disciplinary action taken against them for overprescribing issues or their license was already revoked or surrendered. The main thing I want to point out is that 21% of these cases either resulted in an accusation being filed or an action being pending, or the physician already had discipline for overprescribing. This shows that the physician experts doing their initial review appropriately identified those physicians with prescribing issues that violated the standard of care. Although 21% is a significant number and it indicates that the project is a good source of identifying inappropriate prescribers, the board is also aware that several cases were closed. Board staff has looked at that process and believe that some methodology changes need to be made. First, at the Enforcement Committee in 2017, members recommended that the board also look at emergency room visits for overdose as well as the deaths. Staff believe that we should focus on the death certificates only at this time. In addition, due to resources and time limitations, we believe that the next group of death certificates that should be reviewed will be for the 2016 and 2017 years. And interagency with CDPH is in its final stages for that. Lastly, some changes to methodology needs to be made as well. We've determined that after the first review, which is the review of just the CURES report for that patient, it will then be reviewed with the physician's entire CURES report at that stage and look for the red flags to potential inappropriate prescribing patterns. I should also point out that halfway through this project, we did significantly change the letter what was sent to prescribers based upon comments to explain the project and why the board was requesting medical records. We think the changes to this project will continue to be a success while working to eliminate some of the concerns that have been raised, including those raised today. This project was initiated to find a proactive approach to identifying physicians who are inappropriately prescribing and take appropriate action to meet the board's mandate of consumer protection. The National Safety Council reports the odds of dying from an accidental opioid overdose are greater than dying in a motor vehicle crash. Opioid overdoses are preventable. The Death Certificate Project has identified patterns of unsafe prescribing to save lives. So we need to work together to help conquer this epidemic in our state. And then update on a couple task forces kind of related to that is we do believe that the prescribing task force needs to look at guidelines to determine if any changes need to be made and see if a section needs to be added regarding care and treatment for patients that may be addicted or on high doses of opioids. We would need to have experts again come together to provide guidance on the changes to the prescribing guidelines for pain as the board did back in 2014. In addition, over the next quarter, we plan to also begin working with the Stem Cell and Regenerative Task Force, the Regenerative Therapy Task Force, to review the Federation's policy and recommendations from that policy. An interested parties meeting may also be held by this task force once a review of the policy is complete. We will provide an update at the next meeting. Lastly, I did want to provide a brief update on the Physician Assistant Board as Ms. Forsyth was unable to attend today. The PA Board has met twice since our last meeting, and Jed Grant was elected Board President and Bob Sachs was elected Vice President. Mr. Grant of the Education Workforce Development Advisory Committee provided an update regarding PA programs. Currently, the United States has 236 programs, while California has 16 programs, of which 9 programs are provisional. Mr. Grant stated as of April of 2018, there were 671 California graduates, and in 2017, there were 7,000 graduates in the entire United States. Board members discussed and approved proposed changes to regulations to further strengthen the board's authority to require accurate, complete, and timely responses to CME audits. And then this is one that impacts us as well. Their board actually just recently authorized the initiation of 3 rulemaking proposals to implement AB 2138 regarding substantial relationship criteria, rehabilitation criteria for denials and reinstatements, and rehabilitation criteria for suspensions and revocations. That concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Oh, Dr. Yip?
Oops. Thanks, Kim. 2 questions. One related to death certificate project. The information provided is very informative. Unfortunately, the speakers from the public is not here to hear that. So this information will be in the board minute for the next quarter, but maybe before that, either you can write a update or memo to the board website or the newsletter so that the public know that they're meaningful project. The second is related to the budget issue, more like logistic. Probably the 2 questions with 1 answers. Page 6A-2. Regarding the budget proposal change to increase the HQIU line item for medical consultant by 1.18 million. And then later, we also, next page about the board requests an additional 1.912 million of the cost SOVE. With the elimination of the board, is when the AG budget be reduced by this same amount. Now, HKIE is in a different DCA, so sounds like they control the money, and AG also, they control the money. How do we work to make them get those money for our favor?
So it's kind of a complicated process, but and it's different between the Attorney General's office and HQIU. So when when the investigators went to the Department of Consumer Affairs, we said we didn't want to do an hourly rate. So we defined a budget for them, and they went over to the Department of Consumer Affairs. Any increase that they need, they still have to go through the budget change proposal, but it impacts our budget. So they have to come to us to make sure that we agree with the budget change proposal that they're going to put forward. And so that's a little bit easier on that side. They come to us, we talk about it. Any changes can go in a budget change proposal, but our budget overall, it still funds it, but the budget goes to them. So we give them, we're probably about $20 million that goes to the Health Quality Investigation Unit, and then they spend it as they see fit within there. We have no control over how they spend it once it gets over there, although we have a really good relationship with them and they talk to us a lot about it. On the Attorney General's side, we actually pay them, though, an hourly rate. And so we have a set amount that's been identified years ago, as you know, and it keeps changing depending on what goes on, as to how much we're going to spend at the Attorney General's office, and then they bill out of that on an hourly basis. And they bill for their attorneys, their legal assistants, and all of those individuals. So they bill out of that pot of money. For us now, the reason we have a BCP and to change that amount is because back in 2006, when we went to vertical enforcement, we gave them $1.9 million to do the vertical enforcement program. Now, because that's going away, we would take that out of their budget. So it's kind of bringing it back to where it was due to the elimination of VE. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
We were looking the other day, I think, I was telling Ms. Pines this, we were looking at our budget. I believe like 55% of our budget is actually completely outside of the control of the medical board. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Dr. Hawkins?
Thank you. So I'm pleased we're looking at reviewing the prescribing and updating the prescribing protocol. So when will we figure out about who's going to be on that committee? How will we know about who's available to participate? I don't know who's on that task force now.
So right now we have one member, Christina Lawson is on that committee, but we lost our board member, Dr. Bishop, so I'm going to have to look for another board member that's interested in it. So if any of you are interested, please let Ms. Pines or myself know so we can get that up and going.
Dr. Bullock?
Thank you very much for a really informative presentation. I want to go back to the death certificate issue and wanted to ask, when you were collecting the data, do we have it broken down by specialty? And if not, could we look at that? And I think the prospective approach that you're going to be taking, also looking at the impact to, let's break it down to different functional areas, be that acute care versus federally qualified health centers, because, you know, particularly as we've heard, is can be an impact for some of the federally qualified health centers when, as the individuals mentioned, several systems may decide not to prescribe. But also, I think your point is going to be so important to really review those guidelines, because if someone's been on, let's say, narco or hydrocodone, 10 milligrams 4 times a day for chronic pain, that's halfway, less than half of the milligram morphine equivalent's daily doses. That's again speaks to the opiate naive. But I also think that it would be useful to look at the state of pain management today. As a team, we looked at here, I think there was a last meeting, we looked at the issue of the spinal cord stimulators. Somebody presented that. But what are other modalities and things that can help inform physicians and, most importantly, healthcare consumers of other modalities and treatments?
So, can I just? So it's interesting that you say that. So we've also been hearing from individuals that have been stating that individuals are scared to prescribe, and I've been doing a lot of outreach on cures, which brings me to this issue when I go out and do outreach on this. And it's been interesting, the presentations that I've done across the state, some of them are very adversarial. And just because there's one more administrative task for a physician to do, and that was with the mandatory use of cures. And it's been interesting, and sometimes I will go in, and usually when I bring up the prescribing guidelines, I ask them, how many of you, I put up a slide, how many of you have actually seen these guidelines? And out of like rooms of sometimes 120 physicians, Dr. Yip can attest to this, I think we've had like 6 hands in the office, in the meeting room. We have to find a way to get physicians to read the information put out by the medical board. Education is one of the keys, and the reason I say that, maybe we start looking at maybe giving out CME, changing our regulations and giving out CME for reading the board's newsletter. And the reason I say that is because in that same vein, the last 3 weeks, I've attended 2 meetings at a large health group in Sacramento that's statewide, but I was doing it in Sacramento, and there were a lot of physicians there. The tenor in that meeting was completely different than I've been at any other one. And I talked to their chief medical officer afterwards, and they haven't heard of anybody stopping prescribing. And I think because they, as a health group, took this issue on from the beginning, from the top down, and they've changed their electronic health records to help physicians to identify these individuals. They've put together complete programs to provide non-pharmaceutical treatment for these individuals, and they've put together a group training them to do buprenorphine and MAT. And I can tell you the physicians in the room, it was completely different. So I think that education is really the issue. And I say that because, to your point, it might be something that we usually don't do this. We usually don't have one organization come forward unless they're a state agency and do a presentation for the most part, or they're related to a UC. But I think it would be really good to hear from the physicians what this group in particular is doing to battle the opioid epidemic, because it's vast and it's expansive what they're doing, and I can see a complete difference in how it rolled out.
Thank you.
Dr. Lewis?
Yes, and I wanted to ask Dr. Balat and others if she thought that looking at regional effects might be interesting, because someone in Modoc County with not that much experience, no pain management specialist usually, versus someone in LA or San Diego or San Francisco, and does that affect the data at all? Do you think that might be
No, I
something to
think
look
that's
at?
that is really a key point, and I think
Yes.
that'll help address the issue of what's happening in these communities that may be not in greater Los Angeles. So I think that going to the key point is the educational piece.
Is the
And we
educational.
shouldn't, as physicians, be fearful. We should be partnering and thinking about how are we going to protect our consumers, and I
Right.
think that's the key.
Yeah, thanks.
Dr. Gananadel?
So this is actually a tough issue. Right now, the number of deaths from opioids, prescription opioids, is actually increasing. Number of deaths from the illegal opioids, number of deaths from the illegal opioids is rapidly increasing. A lot of fentanyl is being dumped on from China. And the way it depends upon where it is manufactured. It can be 10 times morphine equivalents or 100 times morphine equivalents. You don't even know what's going to happen. So with this death certificate project, we started it. It was an important thing to do, but as you mentioned, I think we are tweaking it.
Yeah.
Make sure that we don't scare the doctors, at the same time identify the bad prescribers and go after them. So as long as you continue to tweak it, I think this board is okay. A lot of physicians who called, suddenly they got, I think we even changed the way the letter goes out to them. That scared them. And remember that if one letter goes to a physician whose patient died in 2012, this was 6 years ago, they usually go to tell a lot of people. So this is what the scare was. So as long as we do tweak it in such a way that we do identify the chronic bad prescribers, not just because a patient had overdose doesn't mean that the doctor is a bad prescriber. So you got to remember that. I think we're okay, but the bigger issue is the addiction management. The reason people go to street drugs is they don't have availability of medication or weaning them off slowly from the medication. So that's what worries me more than with that cheap fentanyl available all over California.
Thank you. Oh, Dr. Bullock?
I just was going to echo that, and goes back to the education, and that is weaning someone. Years and years ago, that's pretty well written in the medical literature how to do that, and I think the addiction medicine people talked about it. It's a slow taper, and it's not magic. Is it 10%, 15%, 20% per week? But it's individualized patient care. It's not going to be overnight. And I think that the other piece that, and I don't know if it's appropriate to ask this now, but I would really like to urge us to look at the X waiver and determine that buprenorphine is not a dangerous drug. We prescribe more dangerous drugs every day than buprenorphine, meaning that there would be more access if people could prescribe that.
Any additional member comments? Dr. Yip?
Speaking from my own experience, we had a CME for our hospital physician, about 100 so attend. Actually came attend a year ago, and we did again a few months ago. We invite the speaker from the PACE program, talk about the prescribing guideline and all that. The organizer and myself was shocked how the physician are so enthusiastic about it. They actually went 2 hours overtime. I think education is very important. Like when you see the backlash from the death certificate project, some doctors say, hey, I just don't want to deal with it, and drop the ball. But the reality, we need more physicians to be educated to deal with the bread and butter pain cases, have the addiction medicine specialists deal with the chronic complicated cases. So I think we have to do the prescribing task force, do something like a comprehensive webinar that let all the physicians, maybe even required to take 2-3 hours course to educate themselves, make themselves comfortable to do those care of the patient need, the pain management.
Thank you.
Just one thing with that X waiver, because my report was already so long, I didn't put it in here, but I do want to let you know that we are working with an organization right now. We just have not been able to do all of the research that we need to do. There's actually a provision for the X waiver that if the board authorizes it, individuals can count their, and Carrie might need to help me here, but they can count their their training in medical school as meeting the training hours for the X waiver if the curriculum meets the requirements. So could you imagine if they took it there, they'd already be prepared to come out with it, and we just haven't had the time to delve into it yet to see what we need to do as a board. And so that's one thing we would put out, and then we'd put it out to the medical schools so they could actually make sure that they get a curriculum, meets the requirements, and then those individuals coming out would be ready to be X-waivered right there.
Any additional questions from the members? Any questions from the public?
Yes. Hello, Hannah Reed, Dr. Reed, medical member of the CMA, EMOS, and so also Black Patients Matter. So Black Patients Matter, we're actually most active on Facebook, and we're growing, so this is very exciting. But we have a problem with funding the HQIU, and we have a problem with the medical board funding the HQIU and the Department of Consumer Affairs when they're not diversified. And that we're giving them a $1 million+ budget, spending as they see fit. Well, it seems that the evidence would show that the way they see fit is not to diversify their workforce and their investigators. What I want to do is show you the on the website here. When we look at the DCA website, what we find is something which can be coined, and I apologize for the term, but fake diversity. So, as stated in our federal civil rights lawsuit against the DCA, you can see on their website that they have merely paid actors that are diversified on their front page, and then when you scroll down to where it says who we are, well, then you see who they are. They're not diverse. And so with that in mind, we, as Black Patients Matter, have a very serious concern about about the medical board funding this organization that does not hire diversified workforce, but has no problems in investigating utilizing bias in their investigative skills. And so then with great respect to Mr. Chris, of course, Investigator Chris, when we look at his page here on the DCA site, we do see that, of course, he's, of course, done a wonderful job as the DOI premier law enforcement investigative agency. And then the next statement says, our values are based on what's doing right for the public. Well, I thought the statement would probably have been better read as our job or our values are based on defending or enforcing the law, but apparently not. It's doing what's right for the public. So that seems somewhat of a vague statement for an organization that doesn't hire a diverse working force. And the most concerning of all is the next page, the DOI, what they call the DOI stars. So the DOI stars, it's their STAR stands for Staff Appreciation and Recognition. And so when we look at the they're very hardworking employees that they put here in a photo, we see that it's not diversified. So we at Black Patients Matter have a very serious concern about the hiring practices of the DCA. Not only that, in recognizing. Please conclude. Yes, thank you. In recognizing underrepresented minority workers there. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments? Mr. Andrus?
I wish you'd put as much effort into all of your complaints as you do into this death certificate project. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Question about the budget, and I touched on this a little bit at the enforcement meeting. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of play with the amount of money you have to spend on consumer complaints. So I'm curious, who makes up the budget and how do you come up with the amount of money you need? You're only disciplining about 4% of the complaints you receive, so do you only budget enough to handle 4%? If you were to truly do your job and properly process all of the qualified complaints, it would appear that from your budget that you wouldn't even come close to having enough money to do it. Is going over the budget one of the reasons that you close so many complaints unjustly? A note of interest on the Mexico pilot program update, and this is totally not scientific, just a note of interest. Some of the worst cases we're cataloging from your disciplinary files are from doctors who studied at schools in Mexico, including Dr. Israel Chambi Venero, who has 2 malpractice judgments listed on Breeze totaling over $1 million and an arbitration award for $200,000, along with having his staff privileges revoked. He's been sued more than 36 times since 1992 in connection with allegations of malpractice and wrongful death. Even though Breeze only shows $1 million or so in judgments, 10 patients have received verdicts or settlements totaling $3 million. And as usual with this board, he is free to practice without restriction. 18% of the doctors cataloged from schools in Mexico have sexual misconduct charges. Makes you wonder if they're teaching any ethics classes down there. The Attorney General's expenditures on page 7 denote that they're for enforcement, so I assume the $6 million spent for July through December does not include the cost for attorneys to defend the medical board from non-enforcement lawsuits. Can we have a report sometime on how much money the board spends defending itself in court in lawsuits from the public and disgruntled doctors? And finally, the report on page 10 regarding board member per diem. In November of 2016, I did a Public Record Act request when I saw that Dev made $11,800 in 2015 and Jamie Wright made $14,000. If you all only get $100 a day, that means that Dev worked 118 days for the board and Jamie worked 140. That seems like a lot. But as is usual with Carrie, she did not fulfill my Public Record Act properly. I asked for the actual expense reports that these two submitted for their per diem, and Carrie sent me the documents that Kimberly turns into DCA. When I pointed it out that that was not what I asked for, she simply stopped responding, which is par for the course. Now I see that Randy has $7,800 in per diem and Jamie has $6,600, yet Christina Lawson only claimed $2,100. So did Randy work 57 more days than Christina? Did Jamie really work 66 days in just 6 months while Christina only worked 22? My Public Record Act request from 2016 still stands since I never got the documents I requested, and I'd like to update it now to include all of the expense reports submitted by each member for the report on page 10. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments from the public? Any comments on the phone?
No public comments on the phone?
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 7, update on the budget and revenue. I would ask that Mr. Schick and from the Department of Consumer Affairs please come forward. Oh, 2 people.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Taylor Schick, and I'm the fiscal officer for the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'm alongside my budget manager, Robert De Los Reyes. I was asked to come here by the board to give an overview of the budget and revenue for the board, but I wanted to start off with a little bit of an update on the fiscal system, which you may or may not know is the new statewide system for budgets, accounting, and procurement for the state of California. And that's what all departments and state control agencies are eventually going to be going on. I know it's one of the pinnacle items of frustration for a lot of our boards, and that's specific to the lack of reports that are being generated from the system. So DCA integrated onto Fiscal in 2017, and I do want to ensure everyone that the system is working so far as revenue is being received and deposited, contracts are being executed, and invoices are being paid. However, we still have many frustrations and are struggling with the reconciliation of many of those items between the new fiscal system and the state controller's records. So we have to balance those two books. Additionally, we're also struggling with the level of reports that are coming out of the system, which are lacking sometimes in specificity and clarity, so they're not really usable for public dissemination at this point in time. And we've been working with fiscal staff to try to resolve those issues. Currently, the department has yet to close its final fiscal statements for 2017-18. We issued a memo to all of our boards and bureaus in August identifying that those would be closed in March of 2019, and we are still on track to make that date. In lieu of having reports for the boards, our budget office works diligently with the board executive staff using extracts from the fiscal system where we are able to drill down and do data mining to get all the information that is needed to prepare expenditure projections and revenue projections for the board. And we work with them on a monthly and quarterly basis to provide those estimates and work with them to refine them for year-end expenditure projections. And I'll discuss a little bit. Kim did mention that there was a proposal for the DCA administration for business services and fiscal operations. That's a BCP that was submitted by our department specific to address a lot of these reconciliation and reporting issues that we're dealing with on the fiscal system. The proposal is a 2-year limited term proposal because we do anticipate that efficiencies and reporting corrections will be made as more and more departments go on the system, and especially as the state controller's office is brought on board the system, and we're not working in 2 disparate systems. So we are looking forward to being able to provide some efficiencies, and as such, we only requested limited term resources to address those concerns. That's all I have on the fiscal update. And then I just wanted to jump right into the fund condition that was prepared and presented as agenda item 6A-5. So as Kim has prepared, this is the fund condition that does reflect, and it's a little bit more broken out than what is included in the governor's budget, but it does list out all of the budget actions that were made affecting the board's budget. And so you can see all the BCPs listed there as well. The one thing I will note is that there's a structural imbalance with the board, meaning that the revenues are less than the expenditures that are coming out of the fund every single year. And so there is a need to pursue a fee audit to look at how those fees need to be restructured to support the board going forward. As is currently, the board's fees are set in statute, so it would take a legislative change to change that fee. The last time the board's fees were adjusted was back in 2006, and so a lot has changed since 2006. Costs have increased across all areas in state government. The majority of those cost factors for the board are really aligned with costs for personnel services, so retirement rates have increased, benefit rates have increased, as well as general salary increases that impacted not only the board staff, but as well as the investigators that the board supports at our health quality investigation unit. The other big cost impact that the board has incurred is the cost related to their new IT system, Breeze. So that was a fairly significant cost as well that the board is still going to be paying for as they go into a maintenance mode as that project has completed. Because of all those costs, the board is now at a new level of funding that is required, and the revenues no longer sustain that. So we do need to look at what those fees do need to be in the future to ensure that the fund is in good standing. The fund does have a statutory provision that it needs to be within 2 or 4 months in reserve, meaning at the end of any given year, it should not have any more than 4 months worth of operating expenses in reserve, assuming all revenues stopped. That would allow the board to continue to operate for 4 months, and they should not drop below 2 months. As we're showing in the fund condition, the board is projected to drop below 2 months in 1920, so immediate action is needed. The one recommendation I would make to the board is that a fee audit be conducted, and this is going to be an independent fee audit that you will contract out for to take a look at the workload that the board has, as well as all cost factors that are incurred by the board currently and what may incur in the future to try to realign the fees as appropriate to be able to support the fund and the board's operations into the future. That's all I have regarding the budget updates. If you do have any questions, I do have my budget manager here that can add specifics related to the board's fund or expenditures, and any questions you may have on fiscal, I'll just open it up.
So I have a question. So this audit, the board, we would have to pay for this audit, or is this something DCA pays for?
The boards typically pay for it as practice, and fee audits can range in cost depending on the complexity and the license types that each program has. They're not usually too significant in cost, but it is a good thing to go out and get a really independent audit that is the basis for the board's decision-making process for how they want to set the fees in statute and when they pursue a bill to increase those fees.
Okay, thank you. Are there, Dr. Gananadev?
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong. So every penny which goes into this fund are license fee paid by the doctors. Is that correct? Or any general fund money comes in?
There's no general fund money that goes into the board's fund. It is a special fund, so fully supported by licensee fees.
Okay. So when this audit is done, is the audit done only on the revenue, or is it also done on the expenses?
It'll be a
I'm just
full-
putting my finance hat on. I want you
it'll
to
be a
listen.
full review because we not only need to look at the revenues, we need to look at what the expenses are currently and what potentially the expenses are going to be in the next coming years to anticipate growth in the program. Cost of living has increased and, cost of doing business is increasing. So you got to factor that in as well. So it'll look at both expenditures and then look at how would you realign the licensee fees and the revenue that the board intakes to support those expenditures on an ongoing basis.
So do you also look at the license fee in the other states comparable?
Yes, we have seen boards that have gone through fee audits, and they do look at comparable states, Texas, New York, and other comparable states to
So
California.
this audit does that?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Yip?
The revenue currently and the expenses does not reflect the vacancy that we have. So if they are all fully employed, we actually have more money to spend. And your budget is as if we have a full force, right?
Yes, the one caveat here is the fund condition does estimate, especially for 18-19 and all out years, that the board is fully expending their complete appropriation, which is the authorized budget that is approved by the legislature. So this assumes that you fully expend that budget. Now, typically, most boards do revert a little bit, usually somewhere between 1% to 3% of their budget every year. But this is what we're going to push out. And right now, we're actually projecting that the board is actually going to be very close to expending their full budget this year.
Did we still have money borrowed by the state years ago? Was it like a...
Oh, you did have a general fund loan that was outstanding. That has been repaid.
It's paid in the last 2 fiscal years, all the 15 million. Yeah, that's when we knew we were in trouble, when our money was all back and we're still, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any additional comments by members?
I had one.
Oh, you do, Dr.
And the cures fee goes directly to DOJ. So because we just had, when do we have the cures fee added to the license? A couple years ago. So you take that out, that goes right to DOJ, and then you're looking at now full board staffing and where we will be in the budget in so many years and what we will need.
Yes.
Right, and then you have to do, propose it to the legislature.
That's correct.
Because it's a fee change.
Yes, so your fees are currently, I think, capped in statute, and you are at the cap currently.
We're at the cap. Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions from members? Any questions from the audience? Mr. Andrus?
Since he brought up Breeze and audits and budgets, Breeze is such a dismal failure coming from a patient safety standpoint. And it just pains me every time I hear that people are spending more money on it. How many of you are aware that the state auditor did an audit of the Breeze system and that it was originally budgeted at like $28 million and they ended up spending over $96 million on Breeze, and you're still paying for improvements on that thing and it's still that horrible? I think you need to be questioning why you're still putting money into it. I think there's better technology out there today. That system needs to be ditched and a new one brought in. Look at our website at forpatientsafety.com. We're doing better than you guys are on Breeze at keeping patients informed about patient safety. Seriously, take a look at our website.
Thank you. Any additional comments from the public? Any comments on the phone?
We have no phone comments.
Okay. Moving to the next item, which is 7, update. No, thank you, guys. Moving to the next agenda item, which is item 8, presentation on the expert reviewer's role in the enforcement process. Ms. Kirschmeyer and Dr. Nouveau.
So before I start, I have to apologize because there's somebody in the room that I actually need to recognize, and she is at the heart of that death certificate project, and she has spent many long hours over weekends, and I would be completely remiss if I did not acknowledge her, and that is Erica Calderon. She started out as one of the analysts in our enforcement unit. She is now one of the managers over there, and without her, the work of that project would not be done, and I just have to thank her for her hard work. So with that, Dr. Novo's already come forward. I would actually like to first go over, before he gets into the specific roles of the two pieces he has in the puzzle of the enforcement process, I'd like to actually just go over this slide, and I'm also going to ask Ms. Nichols, she's going to go over one portion of this. But it's important to know that there's actually three physician roles within the board's enforcement process. So the first one is our consultant that's in our central complaint unit. And please remember that there is a specific requirement in Business and Professions Code 2220.08 that actually requires, with a few exceptions, that the board has to have the case reviewed by a medical consultant in the same specialty or practice area as the subject physician. So after we gather all of the information from the complaint that comes in, any additional information that comes in from that complainant, then we gather the information from the physician as far as his summary of care and treatment and the medical records. Then that goes out to our medical consultant to determine whether that complaint moves forward, whether there's a departure from the standard of care. Then the next group is the district medical consultants, and I'll have Kathleen speak about that role.
The field medical consultants who work in our district offices are really instrumental to the whole investigative process. So what happens is once the investigators interview the complainant, they interview percipient witnesses, they go out and obtain the evidence, which is the medical records in the cases, and at that point, the case is put together up to that point, and it's given to the medical consultant to review, and that's the clinician part. That's when actually a doctor looks at it, and they're really helpful explaining the medicine to the investigators, kind of in layman's terms, because there's the investigative aspect and then there's the medical aspect. And both aspects have to come together so that there's a clear understanding of what are the issues in the case, how do the allegations tie in with the actual medical evidence that's been obtained. So then those same consultants, they participate in the physician interviews with the investigators. So they're there to ask questions, to help, when the investigator asks questions and the answer that comes back is medical, that medical consultant is there for follow-up questions. They're also extremely instrumental in helping us select the appropriate specialty expert for review, and that's the next part of the process where there's yet another clinician that looks at the medicine. So identifying the appropriate expert, they help us screen that. They also do things such as write good cause declarations for subpoena enforcement when we're not able to obtain medical records and we need a medical opinion as to why we need the records. They then draft those declarations and they're used in court to support the subpoena enforcement actions. So they're just a really valuable instrumental part of our program, and that's one of the reasons why we desperately needed more hours, because it takes time to review all those records and cures and everything and schedule the interviews, and without the appropriate amount of hours, then the cases take longer. So it works hand in hand, but they're just a valuable part of our team.
Absolutely. And then, so speaking of those experts that they help choose, then these are the final physician in the process, and these are the ones that actually have to review that entire package after all of the investigation is done. And then their most important part is that they also, if they do find a departure, they're the ones that are going to have to testify in court. So those are the three roles, and Dr. Nuovo has the fortunate or unfortunate part of being two of those roles, and actually he's also one of our licensing consultants, so he does have actually three roles, but he wears several hats of the board, and one of those is he is our central complaint unit reviewer, and then he's also one of our expert reviewers on some of the cases that actually end up going to hearings. So I thought it would be great to hear from him on the expert's role in this process.
Okay, thank you, Kim. I've been a reviewer in the Central Complaint Unit and a medical expert reviewer for the medical board for 26 years now. And I have a very brief presentation just on my own personal perspective of some of the activities and the approach that's taken. I'm a professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine. I practice full-scope family medicine since 1983. I've been licensed by the medical board in California since 1992. The goal is to give you a perspective of just my point of view, how the process works, how expert opinions are provided. And there are requirements to be an expert reviewer, obviously having a license to be in good standing, no prior discipline, no complaint in the past 3 years, being board certified through the American Board of Medical Specialties, a minimum of 3 years in practice, being actively in practice, as I mentioned, I am, and being willing to testify if necessary at administrative hearing, which I have done many times over the years. Previously, at a presentation just a few hours ago, there was a discussion of the expert reviewer training program. I actually am not one of the presenters. I used to many years ago, but haven't for a number of years. This is an outstanding program that I went through myself. And Dr. Lewis, when you asked the question, is there a lot of time spent on clinical cases? There really are, and it's just outstanding. It really gives the members of the audience a chance to, not just the legal point of view and the process, but to understand the challenges of reviewing each of these cases and coming up with an opinion and what the role is of the expert. There are guidelines for the expert reviewer. These are all critically important. These are the ones I just wanted to briefly mention. Maintain confidentiality. A thorough review of all materials. That's extremely important. And I think the general philosophy I use is that every case, every complaint is unique. Every case, every complaint deserves to have all the information that's available, reviewed thoroughly, and to have an opinion provided. And to ask for more information if needed. There are times in reviewing a complaint in which it's clear that something is missing, either the individual or organization issuing the complaint has incomplete information, or that the physician hasn't provided information that's relevant, or there are more medical records or other documents that need to be reviewed. Reviews are written in a standard format. I'll go over that in just a few minutes. And being available to investigators, medical consultants, and attorneys. And I think the key role that I view, and perhaps it's because as a professor at a university, you're there to educate. There to educate staff in the central complaint unit, the district attorney, the administrative law judge. You're there to be an educator, to explain why is it that I came up with a certain opinion or on a different aspect of a case. So, in the central complaint unit, again, that is assisting in the triage of complaints, and there are lots of different sources of the complaints that come in. These are just a few examples of the most common ones. There are more. Of the patient themselves, a family member, particularly a spouse, significant other, a friend. There are the 801 reports of a settlement that are reviewed. A regulatory agency may issue a report of concern. Pharmacies, not unusual to have a pharmacist submit a complaint of concern over excessive prescribing. And there are many anonymous complaints, and these complaints may come in the form of an online brief message. There may be 40 pages of documents with attachments that come in. There's a wide variation on how the complaints come forward. And the goal is an independent, and I should have put that in big caps because I truly view that as the critical aspect of this. I'm an independent reviewer with the goal of determining whether or not departure of standard of care has occurred. And the first step is, for me, and I believe this is shared amongst other reviewers, and it's certainly a discussion at the training program, is an awareness for potential conflict of interest. So no connection that I would have to the complainant, to the subject physician, to the facility, the institution. That's the focus of a complaint. I have to assess whether I can address the question posed in the case. Is my background as a family physician, is the issue of the concern that's come forward something within the course and scope of what I do? And whether I have the necessary experience pertinent to this case to render an opinion, or whether it needs to be triaged to another specialist. The initial review wasn't clear enough in identifying what specialist was necessary to make an assessment. And the review process is pretty straightforward. There's the letter of complaint from the variety of different people. The response, sometimes the subject physician responds. There are letters that go out to the subject physician. Sometimes they respond in great detail, sometimes they don't. There's a lot of variation. And all the medical records that are available, and occasionally have to request more. And there's always an opportunity to request additional information. That's extremely important. What we receive initially doesn't mean that that's all done. There is always an opportunity to contact the individual making the complaint, accept the anonymous complaints, or the subject to get additional information. The report's written in a standard format. We identify who the physician is, the complaint. Sometimes the physician will be somebody different. The actual treating physician may be different from what was put forward. Identify who the complainant is, the summary of the complaint, the summary of the information reviewed, and the conclusions. And critical in the conclusions is how did trying to describe as clearly and concisely as I can how I came to that particular conclusion regarding standard of care. The case may be closed. There may be a departure and a recommendation for further action. I mean, these are the decisions that get made. There may be a potential for an educational letter that is sent to the subject physician, or there may be a situation where somebody else was identified and an additional case needs to be opened. So those are all possibilities that occur. And the common themes are the ones that have already been described in the previous presentation. These are the most common ones: concerns of negligence or incompetence, lack of knowledge, excessive prescribing, an adverse event that occurred, unprofessional conduct. These are the common things that tend to come across, and with decisions and conclusions that are based on what's in the record. And again, the overall theme is, did the subject follow the standard of care, and is there clear and convincing evidence of a violation? So, in summary, my goal has been to provide reviews that are independent, impartial, unbiased, to use the information available, to gather more when necessary, and to come up with a conclusion with recommendations to the board, and always to serve as somebody to educate whoever it is that I'm communicating with why I came to that conclusion. That's the end of my report. I'll answer any questions that you have.
That's right. Thank you for your presentation. The expert report is something that I'm always looking at, and sometimes I'm very critical in our panel meetings. And one of the things that and maybe you can clarify this for me, oftentimes you see a physician who's in one specialty, and sometimes there's an expert reviewer who's in a different specialty that is opining about the case. When that happens, is there someone that you consult with, or someone that's assigned that's in the same specialty as the physician that's being accused, or how is it that it's a physician in a different specialty?
Are you asking me in the role of triage or as an expert reviewer?
Either one, because sometimes it's not clear why someone who's an internist is reviewing a case for somebody who's an orthopedist, or vice versa.
Yeah, it's challenging to speak generally about that because there clearly is overlap in certain conditions that may have a specialist from a different area still able to give an opinion on that particular issue. So you could have a situation where you may think this is simply, I'll make just a generalization, this is clearly a case for an orthopedist. But when reviewing the actual event that occurred, it may not have been an orthopedic issue at all. It may have been the recognition of an infection that occurred. And that broadens the scope of who may be, was that infection identified in a timely manner, addressed in a timely manner, and according to standards of care. So there is overlap within complaints that allow somebody different than you would have thought initially, but it has to be based on the actual event that occurred and using best judgment as who is capable of giving that answer. Hope that answered your question. It's a tough one, though.
Who makes that decision? Is that you, or is that you in conjunction with somebody else?
Well, I'm often asked that question, so I will provide my opinion with exactly the same explanation, educating whoever is asking me. That type of question often comes to me from a district attorney from a district office, and asking whether I'm, almost as if what I was saying before, whether I'm qualified to answer that question that's posed in the case, and I explain why.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other? Oh, Dr. Hawkins?
Thank you for that. And as a physician, sometimes I have frustrations. There are some expert reviewers that provide very, very good information to help me come to a decision about how to vote. But not uncommonly, I read the report, and part of mitigation winds up involving the fact that the expert reviewer changes their mind about something, or they don't stand up for. The legal team feels that, well, we don't think we can win with this because our expert reviewer is changing what they feel about what they originally said. And there are frustrations about that. I don't know if them being paid more will make the difference, or what type of factors, and this may not be a total question, we may include Kim and other folks, to make the reviewers superficially appear to stand their ground.
I can answer that in a number of different ways. One is that there may be additional information that comes forward, so the opinion will be adjusted. No question that happens. There's also a need for, probably not the correct term, a quality assessment of the reviewers. I think that's fair to say that there are some reviewers who clearly follow the recommendations and the training that the expert reviewer program provides and adhere to that. And there's some who just aren't, it's not within their ability to do that. So I think they're, having an opportunity to assess how effective a reviewer was, how clear they were, how good a job they did in educating the appropriate people as to how they came to their opinion, consistency of their opinion is important. So I think those two things, additional information or perhaps a reviewer who may not be usable in the future.
Thank you very much. And at times they've actually asked that a reviewer be talked to counsel, get clarification to see if they are the type of review you want to continue.
Dr. Bolak?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Nuovo, for an excellent presentation and your perspective. And one of those is your slide on common themes. You have bullet point, negligence, incompetence, lack of knowledge, excessive prescribing, and unprofessional conduct. And as a medical educator, before we practice solo and we're under the supervision of training, be it in residency and fellowship, I'd love to kind of get your perspective. Obviously, this is a big issue. And how do you think we could educate our DIOs and program directors regarding, just these issues that come forward, and what forums have you maybe participated in to address these common themes?
Well, thank you for that. I've spent 12 years as a residency director, 16 years as associate dean of graduate medical education at UC Davis, and as DIO, 4 years as associate dean of student affairs. And this is a very challenging question. The people who govern, I'll try not to give a 3-hour presentation. I'll give a very brief presentation on this. The governing body for residency training is the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. They set rules and regulations and guidelines on how to assess the competence of every resident in every specialty as they progress from internship to the end of their training. The goal is that the residency director is capable of certifying on their last day that they are competent and capable of practicing independently without direct supervision. Sometimes that doesn't work out. And there's a professor at UCSF, Maxine Papadakis, who has done a great deal of research and has presented to the board and has worked with the board in the past on exactly this, a discovery that problematic medical students become problematic residents, become problematic licensees. So I've spent a great deal of my career working with exactly that subset of individual who I'm very concerned about and have taken action to try to help improve their knowledge, improve their skill, deal with the professionalism issues and so forth. The truth is it's not always successful. And that's why, the work that's done here with the board is absolutely critical. So anyways, that's my very brief answer to your question. Okay.
Dr. Yip?
You have always been helpful to the board. Actually, this question is direct to our own. We're here this afternoon multiple times. Can we handle all this complaint, the screen, everything? How the case get to finally to like this step. So looking at, we have 340 contract physicians who probably do the first legwork, looking at all the cases before they go to the next. We have any statistic on the specialty, how many caseload, do we have any quality to double check or random audit? Are they doing the right thing? Do they miss anything? So I think that helps to.
So just a couple of things, and again, there's two different levels of reviewers. So on the upfront one, the central complaint unit, we actually have a unit that deals with the expert, or we call them medical consultants at that level, and those individuals review those consultant reports that come back from those individuals, and from time to time they'll actually send them to Dr. Nrovo to say, can you look at this one? Does this seem like an appropriate evaluation that this individual did? If not, there is an education back to that expert, talking to them about their expert opinion, even the style, even the way they write it sometimes when it comes in, as far as did they follow the format and everything. Our unit gets back to those individuals, and Dr. No has been key in helping us kind of almost as a lead medical consultant to do training and get back to those individuals. Then out in the field, that's even more stringent, because that actually happens with the investigator. They look at those with the medical consultant, and it's not uncommon for them to give feedback to our expert reviewer program for the field experts as well. And when they give that information back, it goes into our database for that individual. And then the Attorney General's office, Ms. Castro's group, they actually do written evaluations of the experts that are how was the individual? And going back to the question I think Dr. Hawkins asked about why are they changing their opinions, it truly is a lot of times because other information comes up during the discovery process, because remember, when they do their evaluation, they have not gotten discovery yet. They've gotten the medical records that have been ordered, they've gotten usually a transcript, but as it progresses and as discovery comes in, including the expert opinion for the other side, those get reviewed by that expert, and a lot of times there's information that was not there earlier in the case, and that's usually when they say, oh, you know what, I missed this, and now, that is no longer a departure from the standard of care. So there is evaluation through the process. As far as a workload, that's not how we do that up front. It actually goes on to the case as soon as it comes in. We have those medical records, and then it goes to that office, and then they send those out to those experts. So it wouldn't be unusual for one expert to have multiple cases at that time, but it's kind of like a revolving door. We send them out and they come in based, again, on the specialty, and that is one thing. We do, ensure that those specialties are matched up.
Dr. Lewis?
I'm just a little, I know you can confuse me, because we've talked reviewer, medical reviewer, but we haven't talked about medical consultants, which resides in DCA. I'm seeing this.
So that's the ones that Kathleen came up and spoke about, the district
Right.
medical consultant.
But we have expert reviewers. We don't have consultants.
So
See,
it's all
looking at this
linguistics. So
No,
it depends on who
it's
you talk to,
confusing
quite
for
frankly.
us.
But district medical consultants are the ones that are in the field that are actually employees of the board, and they assist with that investigation. The individuals who, we call them upfront reviewers, but they're also, we call them consultants from time to time, or an expert reviewer. It's still the same.
Okay.
There is still a reviewer, and then your bottom one, we usually all coin the term of expert reviewer for that final review that makes
Right.
the determination as to really what happens with that
Then
complaint.
the medical consultants of DCA get involved in when it goes.
Well, they're in the middle, so you have that upfront medical consultant reviewer, then you have, it goes to the field, and then the district medical consultant is discussing it, and then at the end, you have the expert reviewer. Does that help? And those are DCA, that district medical consultants with DCA. DCA one,
okay.
right.
I didn't see that. I was looking here, struggling, Jim.
Sorry.
That's all
It's
right.
one of the things I haven't done is that.
Any additional member comments? Dr. Kraus?
Thank you very much. I hear the number often about 10,000 complaints every year. I imagine some of them may not be relevant to physician activity. Some of them might be parking costs too much. Okay, can you give us an idea as to how many of those 10,000 complaints appropriately lead to a request for a physician's record and launch some level of investigation?
I can, if you hold on for just 1 second.
I can just, while she's doing that, they do come through that are clearly related to the insurance coverage. And I refer those, if it's a managed care plan, to Department of Managed Care. If it's commercial insurance, Department of Insurance. So some of the complaints that come through are not related to the physician. They're clearly related to coverage issues and are triaged that way. So anyways, there are some that are that way.
So out of that 10,888 complaints in the last fiscal year, those that were considered gross negligence or incompetence that would fit into the bucket of things that would go to Dr. Narovo's group were 4,956. So those were complaints that we received on care and treatment provided from that physician, okay? The other ones, you have about 200 in fraud. You have about 800 in health and safety, and that includes sale of dangerous drugs, excessive prescribing. That was 800. And then non-jurisdictional, so the ones you're talking about the office staff, they're upset at the office staff. They don't like how much they paid. That was about almost, 1,200, a little bit over 1,200. And then personal conduct, you're looking at those that are abuse, impairment, conviction of a crime, that's about 450. Unprofessional conduct, and these, it's a big catch-all category, but it's sexual misconduct or failure to release medical records, violation of 805 reporting, that's about 2,900. And then unlicensed is about 400. So that's the breakdown of complaints that we receive. You're welcome.
Any additional questions from members? Any questions from the public in the audience?
Yes, hello. Am I able to ask him a question specifically?
This is just public comment.
Comments, thank you. Yes, so Dr. Ree here. Well, I think that for all of us that work in the healthcare field, we just have to recognize and acknowledge that because we're human beings and we deal with human beings, that there will always be a bias of some sort. And so until we allow robots to treat patients 100% and automate that kind of thing, it's important to recognize and acknowledge that. In his previous statement, he stated that there's no bias. I think it's just maybe important to acknowledge that there is some there, and that certainly it's something that we strive to improve upon and that sort of thing. So in my case, of course, I have in my case, which is the ISO part has been determined, that sort of thing, and that's what I'm going to comment on. So I was ordered to see a psychiatrist. He determined no mental illness, but the board still filed, or the state still filed, an ISO, which was subsequently denied by the courts because I don't have a mental illness, but that I was odd. Well, in fact, the medical expert that determined my case had no specific education or background training in racial or, more importantly, religious diversity. And so I would just point out to the board that would be something that's very important and relevant for our medical experts to have that type of specific training, education as evidence on their CV. And I am just I've always said I feel so blessed in my work in that I get to work with other doctors. I mean, brilliant, wonderful humanitarian workers when I go to the CMA meetings. It's just such a blessing. But it's just important that we kind of recognize that, in fact, when we don't have the medical experts that don't have that specific training in racial and religious diversity, but they're otherwise academically very sound, that in fact that there could be a bias because we can't know what we don't know. So, thank you.
Thank you. Marianne Hollingsworth?
Good afternoon. My name is Marianne Hollingsworth, and I'm a patient safety advocate with the Patient Safety League and the Patient Safety Action Network. I would like to express concern for the expert review program regarding the conflicts of interest. We advocates come across disciplines from time to time in which it appears that the expert has a conflict of interest in that he or she personally knows the doctor being reviewed. A case in point is a doctor from the Inland Empire who was arrested and convicted of drunk driving after getting into an accident in 2014 in which both he and his brother were injured. His blood alcohol content was 0.22, almost 3 times the legal limit. In 2015, he was put on 3 years criminal probation, given 22 days of monitored incarceration, and ordered to attend alcohol counseling classes. What is concerning is that when this doctor reported his conviction to the medical board, he was allowed to be evaluated by a doctor described in the documents as a family friend from Hemet. The documents also say this evaluator or expert reviewer, whom I will call Dr. H, has a personal relationship with respondent's mother and father who practice medicine where Dr. H also practices. This Dr. H also socializes with respondent's parents. He later testified at the hearing on the respondent's behalf. Instead of receiving 5 years probation, your minimum recommendation for discipline under your guidelines, this DUI convicted doctor just got a reprimand in 2017. No routine testing for alcohol, no classes, just a reprimand. Now, this brings up so many questions. How is this not a conflict of interest for a family friend to evaluate a doctor and testify on his behalf? How does a medical board allow this? How often does this happen? And can the board throw out a case in the case of a conflict, especially when the relationship is known ahead of time? It's bad enough if the doctor keeps a relationship secret, but when the board knows and still allows a conflict, it makes you all look complicit. You should do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Any, Mr. Andrus?
You knew I was going. You all know this one was getting under my skin as he was presenting this. I have to wonder if Dr. Nuovo was the one that actually weighed in on my sister's case that was closed. I had to laugh at myself when he stressed that it's extremely important to review all the materials. As I've explained to this board several times, my original complaint was closed even though they never got a copy of her certified medical records from the hospital, and they never got a copy of her private autopsy, which was the only document that listed her cause of death. But they still closed the complaint. So what was that expert doing? It just doesn't make sense. Are you aware that oftentimes a consumer can turn in a complaint not really understanding the process and be under the impression that someone is going to call them or come to them to interview them in depth about the complaint, but that this board, more times than not, refuses to interview a complainant? That happened to me recently. I specifically asked to be interviewed and they refused, so the only thing they were going to allow the reviewer to go by were the actual medical records. Now, we all know that medical records are very one-sided and often don't depict a complete picture of what happened. In my sister's death case, the hospital never knew how she died. They only found out after I sued because they got a copy of the private autopsy I had done, another document that the medical board didn't give the reviewer. We sued and settled, so we were relying on the medical board to actually discipline the doctor, but the expert wouldn't allow the case to go forward. When I tried to find out who the expert was to see if he or she was qualified or had any conflicts of interest, the board clammed up and wouldn't tell me. That's not transparency. That's not patient safety. And that's not the way an expert should be deciding on whether a case is legitimate. You can't decide whether there's been a departure from the standard of care if you don't have all the information. And part of getting that information is interviewing the complainant, like the Contractor State License Board does. When I filed a complaint against a kitchen contractor, they sent out their expert who interviewed me for over an hour. But when it came to my sister's death, the medical board couldn't be bothered. When I filed a nursing board complaint, they interviewed me too, but not the medical board. So how are you discerning whether there's a conflict of interest if you're not interviewing the complainant? By the expert's words alone, because certainly someone would always truthfully admit to a conflict of interest, right, Dev? Oh, Dev's asleep. Doctors are often very arrogant about their abilities. Shouldn't it really be left up to the expert to decide whether they have the necessary experience? And should a question I'm losing my place. Experience, and should a complainant not be able to question that experience? How is that transparent and in the interest of patient safety? You rely on the letter of complaint, the doctor's response, and the medical records. 95% plus of the accusations that come out of the board accuse doctors of inaccurate and inadequate medical records. But you're using those records to make a decision on whether to proceed with the complaint. And I'm running out of time, so I just wanted to say real quick that in this doctor's presentation, he never once mentioned patient safety. I think that says a lot about this process. Patient safety is not being considered, and it's the number one element in the law that you all have to follow. But he didn't even mention it in his presentation.
Thank you. Any additional comments in the audience? Any comments on the phone?
No phone comments.
Did she say no? No. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nuovo.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. Okay. Moving to the next agenda item, which is item 9, discussion and possible action on legislation and regulation. Ms. Simones.
Good afternoon. Please turn to tabs 9 on your board packets. So the 2019 legislative session has started. This year is the first year of a 2-year session, and the bill introduction deadline is not until February 22nd. So we will have many more bills at our next board meeting, and this will be my shortest presentation of this year. First, before we move on to the bills, I would like to update you on the 2019 Medical Board Legislative Day. Board staff will be sending out potential dates for the next Ledge Day in February, with the goal of setting up a Ledge Day in April or May. I will be sending the scheduling email to all members, so please reply with your available dates if you are interested in participating. And then next, I'd like to provide an update on the ledge proposals that were approved at the last board meeting. So as you remember, the board approved 3 proposals. One, to amend Business and Professions Code Section 800C to strike the word comprehensive in front of summary, as a determination of what is comprehensive and what is not delays and impedes the physician interview and investigation. The board also approved a proposal to require probationary license information to stay on the board's website after probation is completed for a period of 10 years. And lastly, the board approved a proposal to amend Business and Professions Code Section 2234H regarding physician interviews to strike the word repeated. So if they just fail to attend one time, that would qualify as unprofessional conduct. So the board would like to put all 3 proposals into one bill, but we're still working on securing an author. However, the language has already been drafted by Ledge Council, so we've met that deadline. The board's technical changes that were approved were submitted to Senate Business and Professions Committee, and these changes are still being considered for inclusion in their committee bill. So before we move on to the legislation, although your legislative packets list 2 bills, AB 149 and AB 156, we will only be discussing AB 149 today. Board staff was informed by the author's office that AB 156 is now a 2-year bill that will not be moving this year. We will wait until this bill becomes active before we discuss and take position, as it is likely that amendments will be made before it starts moving again. So with that, I'm going to move on to our one and only bill, AB 149 Cooper. Before we start, I want to point out that my analysis was based on the Ledge Council version of this language. When AB 141, when the bill was actually introduced, it was a little different. However, amendments were taken in Assembly Business and Professions Committee on Tuesday to align the Ledge Council version with AB 149. They just aren't in print yet. So I want to give you a little background on this bill before we go into what this bill does. So as you may remember, AB 1753 Low was signed into law in 2018 and became effective on January 1st, 2019. This bill required that all prescription forms include a uniquely serialized number in a manner prescribed by the Department of Justice. This bill did not include a transition period to allow time for prescribers to order the new prescription forms. This resulted in many prescribers not ordering new forms until right before the new law took effect. This meant that their old prescription forms were not valid on January 1st, and they did not have the new forms yet, which resulted in difficulties for patients trying to get their prescriptions filled for controlled substances. So AB 49 would specify that a prescription for controlled substances written on an otherwise valid prescription form prior to January 1st, 2019 that does not comply with the new requirements is a valid prescription that may be filled, compounded, or dispensed until January 1st, 2021. So it allows some extra time for that transition. In the event that DOJ determines that there is an inadequate availability of compliant prescription forms to meet the demand on January 1st, 2021, this bill would allow DOJ to extend the transition period for an additional 6 months. This bill includes an urgency clause, which means it becomes effective when the governor signs it. This bill is needed to allow for the transition period for prescribers to order the new forms. The board is receiving numerous calls and emails on a daily basis from prescribers and patients regarding the difficulty of obtaining the new prescription forms. This bill will help to ensure that patients receive their medications in a timely manner, and board staff recommends that the board take a support position on this bill.
Are there any questions, Dr. Gananadev?
Put this on. This is, as I mentioned before, this is one of the two things which I got most calls, and this is a serious issue. I actually was in my clinic. I looked at a prescription pad because I'm the department chair. My name is always on the top, and whoever is the provider, they sign and they put their name on. And there were serial numbers on all of them. I said, hey, this is at a county hospital. Remember that we don't move too fast. I said, how come you already have these? They said, no, that's not the number you're looking for. It's a 16-digit unique identifier number. So those prescriptions were invalid.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of calls from physicians very confused about that. And also, why did I have to get new prescriptions pads last year and now I need another one? I just tell them legislation can be changed every year. So unfortunately, that's what happened.
Dr. Lewis?
I can let you, you can take this back to the author or whomever you want to, but I clicked on the link to find out who makes the pads. There's only 3 printing companies in California, I think 3.
There's more. DOJ is actually, they have a security printers program, and in our notice, we did 2 notices, 1 notice and 1 joint notice with DOJ and Board of Pharmacy, and it does have the information for DOJ's security printer program, so there's a telephone number and there's an email address, and that's really who is in charge of that program.
Okay, I did that. This is the 4th week, no response.
Well, I'm responding to my calls daily.
So they said, we'll get back with you, let you know the printers you can call.
I believe there's more than 3, though. I think there's a list in our last notice that at least has a more full list, right?
There is, and it's actually on DOJ's website. I can send it to you.
Right. I think I have a printout, too, I can give you.
Dr. Hawkins?
Well, I think you're going to find a bunch of increasing anger physicians. I threw a bunch of those old prescription pads away when I got the new ones. And the idea that I can get them back after spending $300 with some new ones is not going to be very reassuring.
Well, so now when physicians are calling me, I'm saying, don't throw your prescription pads away. There's a bill in the legislature. It hasn't been signed yet. It's just going through the process, but don't throw them away. But before that, we didn't know that there was going to be a bill introduced. So, now that there's one, I'm telling everyone that, but I think it's not happened just to you. I think there's others that are in the same situation.
Dr. Krause?
Second. Third.
Ms. Philbin?
I was just curious, how much do prescription pads cost, first of all? And secondly, why couldn't they have done it in 6 months? If the issue of opioid prescriptions is so urgent, Why did they do it in 6 months instead of a whole year?
I think that's the question everyone's asked. We should allow for some transition time. That's one of the number one complaints I get, that prescription pads are expensive and they just had to order them last year and now they're having to order new ones this year. So it's definitely something that physicians aren't, obviously pleased about. But yeah, we should have done there should have been a transition period in the original bill. Unfortunately, there wasn't.
Can I answer the question? Yeah. Mine cost $300, but I had about enough to last for over a year that I threw away.
Dr. Gonanadev?
Yeah, this is, the law was with good intent. Unfortunately, it didn't have details, and DOJ did not want to come up with solutions, so that's why it has to go through legislature again. So I'm fully supportive of this one.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
We have a second.
Do we have a second? Okay.
One of us.
Are there any public comments from the audience? Any comments on the phone?
We have no public comments on the phone.
Okay. Ms. Cruz-Jones? Oh, do we? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Marianne. Please come up.
Good afternoon. My name is Marianne Hollingsworth, and I'm a patient safety advocate. I just wanted to ask a question on the update on the bill, if you could, a bill proposal regarding doctor interviews. I know last summer it was revealed that doctors don't have a time limit for submitting to interviews, which makes the whole process take longer. I know we have one case where it took 2 years for the doctor to submit to an interview. So is there any progress with that?
So what the board approved at our last meeting didn't include the time limits. It just included striking repeated. But I mean, if an author were to take this and put a time limit, then I would just bring it back to the board and see what position they decided to take. I'm still having a little bit of difficulty securing an author. So once we get to that step, then we can kind of work all, obviously you know how it goes. When a bill goes through the process, we'll negotiate, and I'll continue to keep the board updated, and we'll, revise or amend our position as needed. But right now, we're just going basically on what the board approved and trying to find that author. So.
Okay, I was just hoping for some agreed upon reasonable time limit, 60 days or whatever you come up with. Okay, and also, just for an update, that the Patient Right to Know bill, SB 1448, has been introduced, their own version, has been introduced in the Washington state by the Washington Medical Commission, following the example set in California. So, pretty cool.
Thank you. Ms. Cruz-Jones, please call the roll.
Dr. Bolott? Yes. Ms. Friedman?
Yes.
Dr. Gonnadev?
Aye.
Dr. Hawkins?
No.
Dr. Kraus?
Yes.
Ms. Lubiano? Yes. Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Sutton-Wills?
Yes.
Mr. Warmoth?
Aye.
Ms. Wright? Yes. Dr. Yip?
Yes.
Ms. Pines?
Aye. Our next item is 9B, status of regulatory actions. Please continue.
Okay, so there's a regulatory matrix under, it's the last page under 9. I'd like to give you a brief update on one of the regs. It's the approved postgraduate training regulation reg. These were approved by the Department of Consumer Affairs on January 14th, 2019. Unfortunately, this did not give staff time to notice and hold the regulatory hearing at this board meeting, so we will have to hold this regulatory hearing before our next board meeting to ensure that changes are made timely. Although this is unusual for our board, many other boards hold regulatory hearings separate from their board meetings. This is something that may need to be done in the future due to the new approval process at the Department of Consumer Affairs. As you can see, we have a couple other regulatory packages pending at DCA for approval. So with that update, and just open it up for any questions on any other regs or on my information.
Any members have any questions? Any comments from the audience? Any comments on the phone?
No public comments on the phone.
Thank you, Ms. Simons. Let's move to our next agenda item 10, discussion and possible action on the brochure. Therapy never includes sexual behavior. Ms. Kirschmeyer.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick about this. I'd like to actually draw the members' attention to agenda item 10 on pages BRD 10-1 to 10-17. This brochure is actually a brochure that is required pursuant to Business and Professions Code section 337 and 728. Over a year ago, the Board of Psychology began working on revising this brochure to expand this information and make it more relevant to information provided by the boards and to rearrange the brochure. They put together Board of Behavioral Sciences, the Osteopathic Medical Board, and our board to revise the brochure. Most revisions to this brochure have already been approved, but due to the passage of AB 2968, in addition to some amendments made by other boards, there are a few revisions to the brochure. The changes in color are the most recent changes. As you can see, the edits are actually very minor. I'm not going to go over each one unless someone has a question, but I would like to ask for a motion to approve the brochure so the boards can get it printed and begin handing out this new brochure to patients who make a complaint and providing it to providers who are required to give it to their patients if they determine that they've had some type of sexual activity with a prior psychotherapist.
Do any members have any questions? I have Yvonne Chung.
Good afternoon, Yvonne Chung with the California Medical Association. I had just one minor change on page 3, line 112. The description of who the booklet applies to says physicians and surgeons, parens, psychiatrists. Because physicians are not specifically licensed to practice psychiatry, it's actually probably more accurate to just leave it at physicians and surgeons because technically, any physician could offer some, a family, for example, a family practice physician in the course of offering counseling could offer a treatment that could be categorized as psychotherapy. So just for accuracy and so it's not confusing that psychiatry is something that is separately licensed, you may just want to remove the word psychiatrist. Thank you.
And for the members, I can actually let you know if you want to make that change. What we're trying to say is a lot of individuals do not realize, we get calls all the time that who licenses psychiatrists and what board does that. So people they don't understand that a psychiatrist is a physician and surgeon. So that's what we were trying to do in that, putting that like that is to try to identify physicians and surgeons, they are psychiatrists. So right, they're physicians and surgeons. We were just trying to find some way to, yeah. Right.
But if you just will use the word including, that they're included in it rather than.
Yes, okay.
I'm sorry.
I can put in parens including psychiatrists. I can take that back and offer that suggestion. So
that way it just shows that if somebody doesn't know that psychiatrist is a physician, then they are included. Otherwise, it looks odd that physicians and surgeons and psychiatrists, who is a physician and surgeon.
Right. Okay. I actually, maybe even clearer than that would just be a sentence that says psychiatrists are physicians and surgeons.
Yeah, I was going to say, given the purpose of the brochure, I think it's critical that it specifically mentions psychiatrists.
Mm-hmm. That's what I will do. I will change it to psychiatrists are physicians and surgeons. That way it's clear.
Dr. Krause?
If you think about it, is there any healthcare professional that shouldn't be included?
Well, the list is really long. It's and it's actually in statute as to who the licensee is. But right, yeah, anybody that finds out.
Any other questions? I have a question. How do we plan to get this out to doctors?
So we have it on our website. We can tweet as soon as we get this out and it's ready. We have a brochure that is used right now, so it's not like there's not one available for them. But as soon as this one goes, I would say we need to put it in our newsletter. We need to tweet out about it. We need to probably do a subscribers note that there's a new brochure that they need to use. And then we need to make sure that we're giving it out to individuals as well in our complaint unit. So if you think of anything else that we should do, let us know.
Okay. It's in your outreach programs you should be giving.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Many doctors don't go on the website,
right.
So you can reach them face to face.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any comments from the public? Mr. Andrus?
Just real quick, my usual disclaimer, and this is mostly for our two new board members because they probably have, I don't know if you know this or not, but 1/3 of all the doctors in this state are members of the CMA. So that means 2/3 of all of the doctors in the state don't belong to the CMA. So the CMA does not speak for all doctors. So that's my usual disclaimer.
Thank you. Any additional comments in the audience? Any comments on the phone?
No public comments on the phone.
Okay. Ms. Cruz-Jones, please call the roll.
Dr. Bolat? Ms. Friedman?
Yes.
Dr. Gonadev? Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus?
Aye.
Ms. Lubiano?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Sutton Wills?
Yes.
Mr. Warmoth? Ms. Wright? Dr. Yip?
Yes.
Ms. Pines?
Yes. Moving to the next item, which is item 11, discussion and possible action on the questions pertaining to impairment on the applications for licensure and registration. Ms. Kirschmeyer?
So please turn to agenda item 11, or BRD 11-1 to 3. As you may recall, at our July meeting, I provided information on several policies that were approved at the Federation of State Medical Boards. One of those policies was on physician wellness and burnout, and in the policy, one of the recommendations was for boards to review their applications to determine if they are appropriately asking questions regarding impairment pursuant to ADA. The focus of the question should be on current impairment and not on illness, diagnosis, or previous treatment. Board staff had already begun discussions about changing the questions on the board's application. In addition to the Federation policy release, the board has also received inquiries from other organizations about the board's questions on the applications. Based upon board staff review, the board has provided 2 options for the board's considerations. Option 1 removes all of the open and unlimited questions and provides just 3 questions, one related to any emotional, mental, behavioral, or addictive disorder that impairs the applicant's ability to practice medicine safely, a second to any neurological or other physical condition that impairs the applicant's ability to practice medicine safely, and one final question about any other condition that impairs or limits the applicant's ability to practice medicine safely. Board staff are recommending this option. The second option is again removing all of the open and unlimited questions, but just offers one question that is all-inclusive and that just asks if the applicant has any condition that impairs the applicant's ability to practice medicine safely. With this question, it does give examples of what those conditions may be. One caveat that was brought to my attention after this was released, and it's something that in the memo we missed one item in there, is that in that list that says including but not limited to, we missed the word physical in there, so it actually should state including but not limited to physical, emotional, mental, behavioral, or addictive disorder. Again, board staff are recommending option 1 because this allows applicants more options to be able to specifically identify with their potential and what their potential impairment is to assist with information being received by the board that could be a consumer protection issue. However, the board members can discuss both options, and we are open to taking any other edits that the members may determine necessary.
Ms. Susan?
I have a question about that. I really wonder if you ask somebody, do you have a mental condition that prevents you from practicing medicine safely? If any human being would answer that question honestly, can't you say something like, have you ever had a mental condition? And then say, explain. And then in the explanation, or explain how you deal with this in your practice, or something like that, so that you give them an opportunity. But to say that prevents you from practicing medicine safely, they're immediately not going to answer that question, I think.
Dr. Kraus?
I agree with that concern. You know, it comes down to the classic argument that we have in the United States of protection of the rights of the individual versus protection of society. And we are always giving the edge to protecting the consumer. So if we worry about this prospectively in terms of being viewed as violating the law of Americans with Disabilities Act, I don't know that we should do that prospectively. I think if we become required to not have an open-ended question, or if there is legal action that says you are barred from asking these questions, then that's one thing. But to prospectively assume that we have to protect the rights of the individual over and above the rights of consumers is something that bothers me. So I would not necessarily commend restricting ourselves unless we become obligated to do so by law.
Dr. Lewis?
Kim, I'm a little confused about the FSMB recommendations because it talks about adopting, but it also says you can revise them or exclude them. I'm looking at paragraph 2 of FSMB statement.
So there are some states that have chosen to exclude these questions from, this was both for the application for initial application and some of the states that have them on their renewal application, and some states have chosen to exclude the questions altogether.
So I'm struggling with, okay, let's say we get rid of it.
You would not want to get rid of it on your initial application, especially because you want to ask those questions of the individual.
But we have to soften the mental health.
You don't have to. Dr. Krause is correct in that there has not been any state mandate, but I would, maybe Ms. Webb should.
Tell me.
There has been action in other states regarding other licensees. And there's a couple of things to bring forward. One is the concern expressed that if people know they have to disclose this to get a license, then they won't seek treatment where there can be documentation of it. And that's also an issue on consumer protection. The other piece is that we still ask about their experience in medical school and their residency program and all the states where they have ever had a license. And if it's something that impairs their ability to practice medicine safely, then these are other opportunities where it may show up. And if there is unusual circumstances, as you know, then more information is gathered to understand why they had a problem. So while right now there's not an action against the board regarding these questions, it may be something that happens if they're not changed to ask if there is a current issue that will prevent them from practicing medicine safely.
Current is the key word, not what happened with physician burnout during the residency and they had some emotional breakdown.
Well, we're still going to get that too to evaluate it, and that's why
we're going to ask that.
That's why we want to focus on the current status. We're going to get information about how they did during their medical school residency and other states where they have licenses.
From what source?
From their medical school, their residency program, and the other states where they have licenses.
I'm not sure about that. I think residents. I think residents sometimes deal with their stressors on their own. They don't seek colleagues' help. They don't seek their mentors' help. They just go and deal with it with their family, and they don't want to bring it into their workplace. So you're going to miss those people because you've now taken them out of an environment where they could get help. And I've been really looking at stressors and suicide and all this now for my union, and I just think you're driving them away. I don't agree with that approach.
Well, I mean, that's part of why the move is to change these questions, is so that they don't have to report that they have been diagnosed and they're being treated, and they are safe to practice because they're being treated, so they don't have a current issue that impairs their ability to practice safely.
Dr. Gnanadev?
Yeah, Ron, I think what this does is either of the two actually takes that stress of the new applicants, especially young people. I've been doing this for 35 years with medical students and residents. The most stressful thing in any education, I'm not talking about other jobs, is medical school and residency program. They do 80 to 100 hours a week. So they do break down. We do provide them whatever they need to really get that help. We also take people with disabilities into medical schools, disabilities into residency programs, and those questions actually always bothered me. When is somebody is going to sue us? It is so wide, so broad question. It was, have you ever been? So this is, I think FSMB is actually doing a good job because they want to make sure that the disabilities are considered. At the same time, actually, they considered the stress of going through medical school and residency. I'm fine with either of the two options rather than what we had. This came up multiple times in multiple places. And so the quadruple aim of everybody in medicine is the fourth one is burnout. Burnout at the student level, burnout at the resident level, and burnout at the physician attending level. So that's why it is extremely important. The other three are all related to quality and safe patient care, but this is related to the physicians. I think we should seriously consider picking either of the option. I think they're similar. I don't see that much difference between each one of them.
Dr. Kraus?
Although I would object to changing on principle, I'm also interested to know what our experience has been. So in the current format of our licensure application, how many applicants indicate something regarding impairment that we would not know about or not consider if we change it to option 1 or option 2? If the answer is 0, then my concern on principle becomes moot.
So unfortunately, our senior staff review, it doesn't separate that category out. We have alcohol and drugs, postgraduate medical knowledge, convictions, and then others. So unfortunately, we don't have that broken out. We wouldn't be able to tell. We can go back and look. The one thing, from our review, when we do get these applications in, when those come in, the biggest one, I think the biggest issue is the first question that is very open and time. There's no time limit around it. So if the individual had even had in a high school, had some type of disorder that they had to go to in that time, and then now they're applying for this, much later in life, they would still have to report that because it asks anytime, have you ever been? And that's, I think, some of the issues that are being brought up as to the vastness of that question. Some people have said asking it, time limit, like within the last so many years, or time limiting it. That's something that hasn't been, not supported either. In looking at the bigger issue of why people are changing this. So it's a difficult issue. We completely understand on both sides of it. I just think that right now we're going to have to make some changes to the broadness of them. No, we can table this. We could actually go back. We can look at other questions that others ask on their application. We could bring more information back to see if there is a better way to ask it. Just to the concerns, I think to Ms. Friedman's point, I think that is a really good point. Are people going to answer it that way? But there's no requirement that we make a decision on this today. And if you want us to table this and go back and gather more information, that's something we can. And I'm sure, I believe the Federation actually of State Medical Boards, when they first started looking into this, looked at all the states in their questions, so we can go back and ask them for that information.
Dr. Kraus?
I would offer a motion to table and refer perhaps to a committee to be appointed by the president in relation to physician wellness and to report back to the board for action.
Second. Okay. Ms. Cruz-Jones? Oh, let me get some comments. Any comments from the public?
I think you have comments.
Oh. Yvonne Chung?
Yvonne Chung with the California Medical Association. We wanted to say that we appreciate the board's effort to proactively address this issue to revise the licensing questions related to impairments that currently impact a licensee's ability to practice. This is consistent with sort of a larger cultural change around physician wellness and burnout that is intended to reduce the stigma about seeking treatment for medical needs. We think that both of these options are a significant improvement over the existing questions in the licensing application. I think we would lean towards option 2, primarily because option 1 separates, while I understand why you want to separate physical, emotional, any other condition, it does, from I think the applicant's perspective, the question then is, if I answer yes to one of these, is the response going to be different? And I think option 2 also allows for, if you have an explanatory section, a lot of times there are coexisting conditions where they have multiple, there's a physical issue that led to a behavioral issue. And so having a broader question may kind of open that up and allow more opportunity to explain what the situation is. But we do appreciate the board's position in taking a look at this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments in the audience? Any comments on the phone?
We have no phone comments.
Okay. Ms. Cruz-Jones?
Dr. Bolat?
Yes.
Ms. Friedman?
Yes.
Dr. Gonadev? Dr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Dr. Kraus?
Aye.
Ms. Lubiano?
Yes.
Dr. Lewis?
Aye.
Ms. Sutton-Wills?
Yes.
Mr. Warmoth? Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Dr. Yip?
Aye.
Ms. Pines?
Aye. Moving to the next item, which is item 12, update on the strategic plan. Ms. Robinson?
Good afternoon, Board President Pines and members. Please turn to page BRD 12-1 in your board packet for the 2018 strategic plan highlights. As you remember, last January, the board formally adopted a new 4-year strategic plan, which is available on the board's website. The plan is guided by the board's mission of consumer protection and organized by 5 goal areas: licensing, enforcement, legislation and regulation, outreach, and board administration. At the first board meeting of each year, I will provide annual reports to the board highlighting the significant strategic plan accomplishments of the prior year. This is the first update since the plan's adoption last January. I will not go over each of the accomplishments listed in the report, but want to highlight a few of them. Strategic goal number 1, licensing. By far, the most significant accomplishment in 2018 was the launch of the License Alert mobile app for Apple ISO devices, allowing consumers to follow the licenses of up to 16 physicians and receive notifications when there has been an update to any of the followed physicians' profile. A consumer outreach campaign was developed, and the board became the first medical board in the nation to utilize such technology to notify patients about their physicians. Since its launch, the app has been downloaded by over 9,000 consumers. Additionally, the licensing program began preparing for its most significant change in decades. Beginning January 1st, 2020, physicians applicants will be required to complete 3 years of board-approved postgraduate training, and the board will begin issuing postgraduate training licenses. Last year, staff worked diligently to develop an implementation plan, including revised applications, forms, policies, procedures, development of webinars, and changes to the Breeze online system. Strategic goal number 2, enforcement. In order to more aggressively monitor the efficiency and timeliness of case processing, last year, enforcement program staff identified enhancements to frequently used enforcement reports to assist with real-time monitoring of case processing to reduce case aging. Additionally, staff developed a new case initiation process to reduce the time it takes to notify a complainant of the action taken on a complaint. Also in 2018, a review of the enforcement program's external communications began to find ways to more effectively communicate information with consumers. Data from consumer satisfaction surveys is under evaluation to assist with determining needed improvements. A review of the expert reviewer program also began. A cloud service was implemented, and cases for review are now cost-effectively, safely, quickly delivered to expert reviewers. Staff also developed and migrated the expert reviewer program to a new database to assist investigators and staff with case management. Strategic goal number 3, legislation and regulation. In April 2018, staff developed a successful legislative day at the Capitol. Board members met with several legislators and their staff to discuss the board's strategic plan, mobile license alert app, and legislative priorities. Staff also reviewed the board's laws and regulations, as well as suggestions from stakeholders, and identified needed changes. These legislative proposals were presented and approved by the board at the October 2018 board meeting. Regulations underwent non-substantive cleanup, including repealing outdated regulations via Section 100 changes. Staff also developed a webpage to educate stakeholders on legislation of interest to the board's position on the legislation, and how stakeholders can provide input during the legislative process. This webpage will be released this year. Strategic goal number 4, outreach. In 2018, a new communications plan was developed and unveiled, which included a significant redesign of the board's newsletter, a new seal, and logo. Board staff held nearly 40 outreach events across California to both consumers and physician groups, providing education on the board, the enforcement and licensing processes, and new laws of interest. Last year, the board expanded its use of social media platforms to maximize its reach to consumers. The board hosted its first ever Facebook live stream with the launch of the License Alert mobile app press conference in July 2018. The board also began posting administrative actions on its Twitter and Facebook feeds. The board also launched its first podcast titled Medical Board Chat, becoming the first licensing board within the Department of Consumer Affairs to use this form of outreach. 2 other podcasts have been published, and more are in process. A communication improvement plan was also developed by the board's call center, which included review of call statistics to determine specific training needs for staff. Call scripts were also updated to improve the quality of customer service delivered to consumers in the board's call center. 2018 was a year of collaboration. Staff partnered on several significant legislative mandates that reached across multiple DCA boards, including the Cures mandatory use requirement. Staff conducted webinars with the Department of Justice, as well as designed a Cures fact sheet that is being used by DCA hearing arts boards in outreach to their licensees. Strategic goal number 5, board administration. The annual President's Employee Award was established. The inaugural award was presented by President Pines at the January 2019 all-staff meeting in Sacramento to Sean Eichelkraut and Frank Islami for creating the board's License Alert mobile app. In 2018, board members attended staff events boosting employee morale, as well as assisting with outreach events and expert training statewide. Staff reviewed the death procedures manuals to audit methodologies and evaluate effectiveness. Board death procedure manuals and onboarding manuals were revised and are under current review. For the strategic plan looking ahead to 2019, a year of several firsts in 2018 was an innovative, productive, and memorable year for the board. Looking ahead at 2019, the second year of the board's strategic plan, staff are more energized than ever to build upon the success of 2018. Think bigger and do even more. Highlights of what's in store for 2019: The staff will continue to work diligently with the Attorney General's Office and the Department of Consumer Affairs to consistently identify new approaches to improve the enforcement process and decrease timelines. Develop a license alert mobile app for Android smartphones. Launch online videos to assist customers through the steps of the complaint process. Host online webinars for stakeholders. Launch a new license type in Breeze, the new postgraduate training license, and create an optional end-of-call survey for the board's call center. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to update you on the exciting achievements of the strategic plan's first year. Thank you also for your partnership in the year ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Do we have any questions from the members? Any questions from the audience? Any questions on the phone?
Do we have any questions on the phone? Do we have any questions on the phone?
No phone questions.
Okay. Moving to the next agenda item, 13, update on the Health Professions Education Foundation. Dr. Hawkins.
Okay, good evening, and I refer you to tab 13. I'm just going to briefly remind everybody what Health Professional Education Foundation is and does, and you can review the detail yourself. The Health Professions Education Foundation, also called HPEF, board met January 9th, 2019 in Sacramento, and I was in attendance. The Health Professions Education Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit housed within the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development. HPEF improves access to health care in underserved areas of California by providing scholarship and loan repayment programs to aspiring and current health professionals who are dedicated to providing direct patient care in those areas. In return for their support, recipients agreed to provide direct patient care in a medically underserved area of California for a period of 1 to 3 years. Since 1987, this resulted in approximately 16,000 awards, totaling more than $170 million to physicians, dentists, allied health, nursing, and mental health practitioners practicing in the 58 counties of California. The funds come from grants, donations, licensing fees, and special funds. The Stephen M. Thompson Physician Corps Loan Repayment Program provides up to $105,000 for 3 years of service by primary care physicians and medically underserved areas of California. The application cycle for the fiscal year 2018 to 2019 opened December 3rd, 2018, and closes February 27, 2019. And again, these are for not just physician, but physician, all allied health professions, nurses, mental health providers. A total of $5 million in loan repayment and scholarship is available for this 2018 to 2019 fiscal year. This is a bit less than it was prior year. I should state that additional funds will be available in the 2019 to 2020 years related to HPF becoming a beneficiary of mergers that have been approved between pharmacy and some medical insurance companies. We're working on ways to increase our fundraising as well.
Thank you, Dr. Hawkins.
Can I just add one thing on that? I did want to add one thing. I actually talked to the executive director, Ms. Aspreck, and one thing is that they are, if anyone is interested in volunteering to score the Stephen Thompson Loan Repayment Program applications in mid-March, we usually send our staff. I think we have at least 3 of our staff that sit in on that, but if anybody else is interested in that, please just contact me. And it does take some time. There's as Ms. Simo, she's one of the reviewers, she'll tell you it takes a lot of time, but if anybody is interested, let me know.
Thank you. Dr. Gananadeh?
Just a little beyond this, still many people are not aware that there is $190 million one time available from Proposition 56 funds. They will be distributed in the next few months. Applications will start from Physicians for Healthy California. So it's a big program. It doesn't, it's not only includes primary care, it includes all the specialty physicians too. So it's a one-time program from the tobacco tax initiative we passed a couple of years ago.
Thank you. Any additional questions from the members? Any questions from the audience? Any comments on the phone?
We have no phone comments.
Okay, great. We will recess until tomorrow at 9 a.m.